Pant, pant, pant. Within the library pavilion, heavy panting sounds could be heard. Nu Xiong's face turned red as he was lifted up by Jian Wushuang's fingers. He kept growling and pulling on Jian Wushuang's arm with both hands while his legs kept kicking in the air. However, no matter how hard he struggled, Jian Wushuang's 5 slender fingers, with distinct joints, seemed to be cast from molten iron. He could not move them at all. Stop! Let go of senior brother Nu Xiong. The disciples behind Nu Xiong's group immediately shouted at him. Jian Wushuang was expressionless and ignored them. To the current him, even if he did not use divine power, he could easily crush a void warrior like Nu Xiong. He who was not even at the scar level, he could easily deal with him with just the physical strength of the Chaos Overlord body. If Jian Wushuang wanted to kill him, it would be easier than killing an ant. Remember, don't mess with me. Jian Wushuang looked at him coldly and loosened his fingers. Plop. All of a sudden, Nu Xiong fell to the ground on his butt. He raised his head and looked at Jian Wushuang, and his forehead was oozing with beads of sweat. In the eyes of outsiders, it seemed that Jian Wushuang had attacked first and caught him off guard. However, only he knew what he had just experienced. Jian Wushuang's glance had given him a sense of great horror, as if he was on the verge of death. He had only experienced such a feeling and pressure from his master, the Grand Elder Pan Shan. Thud, thud, thud. Jian Wushuang held the hilt of the Tarot Divine Sword hanging at his waist in one hand and a book in the other as he walked out slowly. This guy. Nu Xiong turned his head and looked at Jian Wushuang's back. He was still in shock and his back was already half-drenched in sweat. Senior brother Nu Xiong, should we go after him? Senior brother Nu Xiong, this person has just entered the God-refining sect. If he doesn't respect you, what will he do in the future? Senior brother Nu Xiong, in my opinion, we must go and teach Wushuang a lesson. He's really too arrogant, the disciples said indignantly. Shut up. Nu Xiong spoke coldly, abruptly cutting off the unending words. A bunch of idiots, can't you see? Even I'm no match for him. So how are you going to teach him a lesson? Nu Xiong stood up from the ground, took a deep breath and said, This Wushuang isn't simple. From now on, you are not to provoke him in the slightest. Otherwise, if anything happens, I won't be able to save you. Don't blame me for not warning you in advance. When these disciples heard this, they could not help but look at each other. They opened their mouths as if they wanted to say something, but in the end, nothing came out and they nodded obediently. Let's go. Nu Xiong shook his head. After such an interruption, he had already lost all his face. Naturally, there was no need for him to stay here any longer. Whoosh! The group of disciples followed behind the Nu Xiong. Void warrior He Qi, Zheng Heng, and the other 4 disciples could not help but squint their eyes. He Qi, it seems Wushuang isn't a simple person, Void warrior Xianxia said. Yes. I'm afraid he's a tough guy who has hidden his strength. TSK, TSK. Just one move was enough to make the Nu Xiong so frightened and respectful. This Wushuang's strength is probably at the same level as us. Void warrior He Qi nodded and said, Humph, who cares about Wushuang's cultivation? We'll just not provoke him. However, if he dares to do anything in secret, I'll definitely make him regret coming to the God-refining sect. Zheng Heng snorted and said, Thud, thud, thud. At this moment, a series of heavy footsteps came from outside the library pavilion. The sect master's people have arrived. The 3 head disciples, Xianxia, He Qi, and Zheng Heng, exchanged glances with one another. Their faces were filled with grave expressions. To them, Jian Wushuang was just a minor injury. The real enemy was the sect master's branch. Whoosh whoosh. Jian Wushuang flew in the air and quickly returned to the limestone mountain. At the foot of the limestone mountain, the enchanting woman named Zhou was still there. Seeing Jian Wushuang's intact appearance, she could not help but ask in surprise, Wushuang, how are you unscathed? Could it be that you didn't meet the disciples of the 5 branches? Jian Wushuang smiled and replied casually, I did, but they didn't cause me any trouble. Ah? Junior brother Wushuang, your luck is truly good. Joshua nodded, then deliberately put on a straight face and said, however, junior brother Wushuang, you must not be careless. The disciples of the 5 branches are not easy to deal with. You are the only disciple with extraordinary talent in our sect. They will definitely come to find you. Okay, I got it. Thank you. Jian Wushuang gave a few perfunctory words and did not talk much. He stomped his right foot on the ground and suddenly shot into the sky, straight into the corpse cave at the top of the mountain. With a wave of his right hand, the magic barrier at the entrance of the corpse cave was activated again. Jian Wushuang stepped onto the stone bed and sat down with his legs crossed. Taking a deep breath, Jian Wushuang's divine power surged into the book, and he started to read the information recorded in it carefully. The book only recorded the general formation of the void power. As for the detailed formation of the structure, Jian Wushuang still needed to continuously try to assemble it. However, even so, it was of great help to Jian Wushuang. Before this, he had been like a headless fly. Even if he wanted to form and mess up the structure of divine power and rearrange it, he felt that he did not know where to start. However, the appearance of this ancient book was equivalent to pointing him in the right direction. Let's start. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and closed his eyes slowly. He started to study and deduce repeatedly in his heart. He messed up the most original structure of the divine power and turned it into void power. This was a huge project. A day passed. 2 days had passed. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. During this half a month, it was calm and no one disturbed Jian Wushuang's cultivation. This allowed Jian Wushuang to completely immerse himself in the transformation of divine power and void power. The dragon's pine incense candles on the candlestick continued to burn with green smoke that would never go out. One day, half a month later, I found it. Jian Wushuang suddenly opened his bloodshot eyes. However, he did not look tired at all. Instead, he was ecstatic. A period of 15 days was usually as short as a breath for cultivators. It was so short that it could be ignored. However, to Jian Wushuang, his gains in the past 15 days were huge. For 15 days, Jian Wushuang had been deducing in his mind every minute and every second. The mental strength he had spent was simply uncountable. However, fortunately, he finally found the most crucial point of conversion between divine power and void power. To the current Jian Wushuang, there was nothing more important than turning divine power into void power. As long as he could convert his divine power into void power, not only would he be able to find a way to completely destroy the curse power that Wang Lu had left in his body, but he could also break through to the intermediate supreme realm. He had been stuck at the primary supreme level for too long. Before he had gone to the off-world battlefield, he had already had a chance to break through to the intermediate supreme level. Now that he had gone to the void universe, he could finally break through to the intermediate supreme level. To him, the intermediate supreme realm was just a step away. However, his breakthrough had been delayed time and time again because of this and that. It was only when he entered the void universe that Jian Wushuang's breakthrough was completely cut off. In the God-refining sect, there were many inconveniences in breaking through. It was inevitable that his aura would leak out. And once the aura leaked out, it could be said that a disaster would come. If he could turn divine power into void power, he would not need to worry about this. As long as he could convert his divine power into void power, not only would he be able to break through to the intermediate supreme realm without any worries, but he would also be able to completely solve his worries. Even if he were to fight with others, he would not be afraid of the risk of being exposed. Let's start now. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered and he stretched out his right hand. Instantly, a large amount of divine power gushed out of his hand and turned into a ball of divine power. Change. In an instant, the most fundamental power of divine power started to change. Whiz, the ball of divine power kept twisting and changing, making a cracking sound like glass breaking. Bang! Bang! The next moment, the entire ball of divine power exploded. Did it fail? Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes, but he was not discouraged. Instead, he took a deep breath, and the ball of divine power condensed in his hand again. Whoosh! In the deepest part of the divine power, Where it could not be seen by the naked eye, protons and electrons were separated and then reassembled. Jian Wushuang held his breath and stared at the ball of divine power in his palm. Crack, crack. The divine power twisted and made a sound similar to glass breaking. The ball of divine power began to flicker, as if it was changing in another direction. Jian Wushuang could not help but show a touch of joy. However, before he could even smile, bang! With an explosion, the entire ball of divine power shattered again. Another failure? Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. This time, he did not rush to form the ball of divine power again. Instead, he started to think about the changes in it. After a long while, Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and continued his experiment. Bang! Bang! Failed. Bang! Bang! Failed. This cycle continued for 3 days. A ball of divine power that looked like the sun suddenly jumped and made a deep sound. In the next moment, the ball of gold power began to tremble violently. Its aura began to move toward an unknown realm. Jian Wushuang stared at the ball of divine power. He could feel that he was only one step away from success. The surrounding space was being compressed crazily, and cracks appeared in the void. Boom! All of a sudden, a loud explosion was heard. Endless smoke filled the air. Jian Wushuang swung his sleeve and dispersed the smoke. The next moment, the ball of divine power that was originally golden had turned black. This is... The light in Jian Wushuang's eyes suddenly grew by 3 inches. His usually calm face could not help but show a touch of excitement. He stretched out his hand and touched the ball of divine power. Void power! This is void power! Jian Wushuang laughed out loud. It was a success. He had finally succeeded. He had spent a lot of effort calculating the structure and arrangement of divine power and void power. Then, after continuous experiments, he finally started from the origin of divine power and changed its structure, turning it into void power. Then the next step is to transform all of my divine power into void power. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered as he thought quickly in his mind. As long as the first step was completed and the method to convert divine power into void power was found, then the later conversion between divine power and void power would just be done according to the book and so on. Transform! Jian Wushuang shouted in a low voice. In an instant, the divine power in his body that was as vast as the ocean changed. Crack! The structure instantly changed and reassembled. Jian Wushuang's aura began to change dramatically. A moment later, it's done. Jian Wushuang smiled. He had turned all the divine power in his body into void power. Even if he used his divine arts to fight with others, no one would be able to see any trace of divine power in his body. Of course, this did not mean that Jian Wushuang had really become a void warrior. His divine soul and life source were both from the divine power universe. The next step is to break through to the intermediate supreme realm. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath. He decided to take this opportunity to break through to the intermediate supreme realm. Once he broke through to the intermediate supreme martial artist realm, his strength would have a qualitative improvement. Wushuang! Just as Jian Wushuang was about to break through in one go, a solemn voice suddenly came from outside the corpse cave. Elder Mi Feng. Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and waved his hand to remove the barrier at the entrance of the corpse cave. Jian Wushuang stood up and rushed to the entrance of the corpse cave. Elder Mi Feng. Jian Wushuang cupped his hands and bowed to him. Yes. Elder Mi Feng nodded in response before asking, Wushuang, how have you been in the sect? I've heard that you had a conflict with the head disciple of Pan Shan's line. That little fellow Nu Xiong. Jian Wushuang was dumbfounded. Was Elder Mi Feng so well informed? Jian Wushuang nodded and replied, Elder Mi Feng, it's just a small conflict that doesn't matter. There's no need to take it to heart. Yes, that's good. Elder Mi Feng stroked his beard and nodded with a smile. Wushuang, with your talent, you'll definitely be a dragon-like figure in our god-refining sect in the future. There's no need to bother with those ordinary disciples. You just need to cultivate in peace. When you break through to the scar level, I'll recommend you to the sect master and make you an elder of our sect. Then I'll have to thank you, Elder Mi Feng. Jian Wushuang smiled. There's no need to be so polite with me. Elder Mi Feng shook his head and said with a smile, Wushuang, I should have come to take you to see the sect master long ago. But something happened at the last minute, and I was delayed. All right, now you'll have to follow me. The sect master is very curious about you. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Jian Wushuang followed behind Elder Mi Feng and quickly headed toward the highest peak of the God-refining sect. That was where the God-refining sect's sect master was. According to Jian Wushuang's observation over the past 10 days, he had figured out some of the strength of the God-refining sect. The sect master of the God-refining sect, Ba Huang, was a six-scar void warrior. In terms of the divine power universe realm, he was an invincible supreme. Under the sect master Ba Huang, there were another 5 grand elders. Even the weakest of these 5 grand elders had reached the 4-scar level. Under these 5 grand elders, there were nearly 20 ordinary scar level void warriors. This was the strength of the God-refining sect on the surface. In terms of the divine power universe, it was similar to the divine life palace, but it was much stronger than the divine life palace. This was because everyone in the God-refining sect had a divine corpse that was similar to their own strength. In other words, it was equivalent to doubling the number of void warriors in the God-refining sect. Moreover, Jian Wushuang was certain that there was an even more unimaginable power in the God-refining sect. Jian Wushuang thought about it and kept comparing the God-refining sect with the divine power universe he was in. Once the two universes went to war, the God-refining sect would be a tough bone to chew. Under Elder Mi Feng's lead, the two of them were extremely fast. It did not take long for them to reach the highest peak of the God-refining sect. A palace that looked like it was made of countless white bones appeared before Jian Wushuang and Elder Mi Feng. Countless yellow willow. The wisps floated in the air, like fireflies, lighting up the sky. Wushuang, the sect master, is inside. Please follow me in. Elder Mi Feng turned to Jian Wushuang and said with a smile, All right. Jian Wushuang nodded. From the moment he stepped into the palace, he could vaguely feel a pair of eyes watching him in the dark. If he was not wrong, this pair of eyes should be the God-refining sect's sect master. If he had not converted his divine power into void power, Jian Wushuang might have been worried. However, now that he had figured out the nature of divine power and void power and had successfully converted them, he was confident that even if the God-refining sect master had a pair of sharp eyes, he would definitely not be able to see through his identity. Creak. The 2 black iron gates of the sect master's palace opened on their own, and Elder Mi Feng and Jian Wushuang strode in. The first to enter his sight were the Grand Elders and a group of elders who were standing on both sides of the hall. Among them, the Elder Shenlian was also present. He saw Jian Wushuang walk into the hall and a sinister smile appeared on his face. At the very top of the hall, a dignified middle-aged man in an extremely long black robe with the corners of his clothes scattered on the ground and a vertical eye between his brows sat on the main seat. He did not need to guess to know that this person was the sect master of the God-refining sect, Ba Huang. Sect master, I've brought Wushuang. Elder Mi Feng cupped his hands at him, then walked to the middle of the 2 sides and returned to his seat. Disciple Wushuang greets Lord Sect Master. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and lowered his head. Raise your head and look at me. A deep and majestic voice came from the God-refining sect master's mouth. Yes. Jian Wushuang looked up. The God-refining sect master looked at him with bright eyes. His face was expressionless, and no one could tell what he was thinking. A mountain-like pressure suddenly spread out from his body and pressed down on Jian Wushuang like a mountain. Jian Wushuang's body sank. Wushuang, I've heard that when you came to participate in the selection of our sect's disciples, you accompanied 3 other people, right? The God-refining sect master said indifferently. Yes. Jian Wushuang nodded his head. He knew that the God-refining sect master was trying to manipulate him. Or rather, the God-refining sect master did not completely believe in his identity. Jian Wushuang could not help but turn his eyes slightly. He glanced around and saw that Elder Shenlian was also looking at him with a faint smile. The 2 of them looked at each other. In an instant, Jian Wushuang understood that Elder Shenlian must have said something behind his back. Do you know the identity of these three people? The God-refining sect master asked again. The pressure on Jian Wushuang suddenly became heavier. I don't. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and replied with certainty. Oh? Do you really not know? Or are you just pretending? The sect master asked calmly as the corners of his mouth curled up. Sect master, if you have something to say, you might as well say it directly. Jian Wushuang raised his head and looked at the God-refining sect master seriously. Facing the overbearing gaze of the God-refining sect master, Jian Wushuang's eyes were clear, and he did not have any intention to retreat. When the God-refining sect master heard this, his pupils could not help but shrink. You little fellow, you are quite bold. The God-refining sect master shook his head and continued, Wushuang, I'll be direct. I suspect that you are in cahoots with the three spies who want to enter my God-refining sect. Can you allow me to use the soul-searching technique? As he said that, the divine light in the God-refining sect master's eyes grew by 3 inches and he stared at Jian Wushuang. Elder Shenlian had a mocking expression on his face. Jian Wushuang's heart sank when he heard this. The divine universe also had the soul-searching technique. It could enter the divine body and soul directly through the great Dharma power to see the cause and effect and see the past and the future clearly. Why wouldn't I? Jian Wushuang thought quickly and replied with a laugh. He knew that he could not afford to show any signs of fear. The moment he hesitated, it would only increase the suspicion of the God-refining sect master and increase the risk of being exposed. He could only take a gamble. He gambled that the God-refining sect master would definitely not use the soul-searching technique on him. This technique forcefully pried into the heavenly secret's great Tao and was extremely harmful to the person who was being searched. Could be said that it destroyed the Tao foundation and destroyed the target's future. And now, he had a rare supergrade talent in the God-refining sect. The God-refining sect master would definitely not reverse the cause and effect and forcefully destroy this good seedling because of a groundless guess. As expected, before the sect master could say anything, Elder Mi Feng stepped out and said anxiously, Sect master, you can't do this. Wushuang is a rare talent in our God-refining sect. He has also refined the number 1 divine corpse in our sect. His future is limitless. If we use the soul-searching technique on him, it will be the same as cutting off his path of advancement. The sect master of the God-refining sect snorted and said, Elder Mi Feng, the greater one's talent is, the greater the danger. You should know better than me the identities of the 3 people who appeared outside the Mountain Gate selection that day, right? If this Wushuang has ill intentions and comes from the same place as those 3, then our universe's tens of millions of years of plan will be exposed and ruined. Can you bear the responsibility? Then, the God-refining sect master looked at Jian Wushuang coldly and said, Wushuang, this matter is of great importance. We can't allow even a 1 in a million risk. Don't blame me for being merciless. As soon as he finished his words, a large amount of void energy gathered in the hands of the God-refining sect master. In an instant, Jian Wushuang's heart sank to the extreme. Escape? At that moment, thousands of thoughts flashed in Jian Wushuang's mind. He would definitely not allow the God-refining sect master to perform the soul-searching technique. If he did, the fact that he came from the divine power universe would definitely be exposed. Although he had turned his divine power into ethereal energy, the soul-searching technique allowed him to enter the river of time and trace the deepest memories. This was something that Jian Wushuang could not change no matter how much he tried. Rather than being exposed and killed after being soul-searched, it was better to retreat now. For a moment, Jian Wushuang's expression remained unchanged, but he began to think of retreating. If he had activated Primordial Universe and Life Intimidation, in addition to secret skills that burned his divine power like Dragon Blood secret skill, he might catch these guys off guard. Jian Wushuang believed that he might have had a chance to escape. Moreover, he still had divine power composition as a trump card, which could confuse the heavenly secrets. However, in that case, all of Jian Wushuang's previous efforts would be in vain, and he would not be able to take the divine corpse of Supreme Tarot away. Wushuang, come. just as the God-refining sect master was about to prepare the soul-searching technique. One of the 5 Grand Elders, Elder Pan Shan's eyes flickered and he suddenly said, "Sect Master, Mi Feng is right. This Wushuang is a rare seedling of our God-refining sect. With his talent, he'll definitely become an existence on equal footing with us in the future. If we use the soul-searching technique and find that he really did come from the same place as those 3, then it's fine. Please reconsider this matter, Sect Master." Jian Wushuang, who had already fled, raised his eyebrows and looked at Elder Pan Shan. Elder Pan Shan nodded at him, and a strange light that only Jian Wushuang could see flashed in his eyes. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang's heart skipped a beat. "Yes, Lord Sect Master, can you test if Wushuang is from the same place as those 3? There are many other ways to tell. Why do you need to use a soul-searching technique?" Elder Mi Feng hurriedly said. When the sect master of the God-refining sect heard this, a hint of hesitation flashed in his eyes. As if he was in deep thought, the God-refining sect master nodded his head after a while and said, "All right, then we'll do as the elders say. Wushuang, how about this? Release your void energy and let sect master take a look." As soon as he said that, the others did not have any expression on their faces. However, Elder Shen Lian let out a sinister smile. He had asked around. Ever since Jian Wushuang entered the God-refining sect, he had never really used void power. Even in the library pavilion, when he clashed with the disciples of the 4 divisions and fought with the new Xiong, he used his physical strength. From this, one could deduce that there was definitely a reason why Wushuang could not or did not dare to use void power. However, just a breath later, the smile on Elder Shen Lian's face instantly froze. How could this be? In the hall, Jian Wushuang spread his fingers. In his palm, there was a black ball condensed by void power that was constantly twisting. The void energy within was extremely pure. Jian Wushuang looked at the sect master of the God-refining sect and said, "Lord Sect Master, do you think this is enough?" In an instant, the sect master's expression darkened, while Elder Mi Feng's face flashed with satisfaction. As for Grand Elder Pan Shan, who had helped Jian Wushuang earlier, there was a strange look in his eyes. He seemed to be surprised as Jian Wushuang released his void power. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. There's definitely something strange going on. At this moment, Elder Shen Lian exclaimed. He stared at Jian Wushuang with a gloomy expression. Jian Wushuang looked at him with a calm expression and said, "Elder Shen Lian, I don't know how I've offended you. You've been targeting me ever since I participated in the entrance selection. I remember that we don't have much interaction, right? As for the soul-searching technique, I'm afraid it was also you who suggested it to Lord Sect Master to perform it, right? Elder Shen Lian, I'm very curious now. Did I offend you in any way? Or did I accidentally violate some of your benefits, causing you to hate me so much?" The moment he said that, the other elders seemed to have thought of something. They narrowed their eyes and looked at Elder Shen Lian with a complicated gaze. They could not help but recall that Elder Shen Lian's biological son was now the sect master's head disciple and was publicly acknowledged as the God-refining sect's #1 genius. Before Jian Wushuang came to the God-refining sect, Elder Shen Lian had already proposed to the sect master time and time again in the main hall for his son to be the next sect master substitute. All sorts of thoughts appeared in the minds of the elders in the hall. Once this thought began to take root in his mind, it would gradually sprout and grow stronger until it could not be eliminated. "Wushuang, you're talking nonsense." Elder Shen Lian's expression changed drastically. He wanted to continue, but was interrupted. "Enough!" The sect master looked at him coldly and then looked at Jian Wushuang again. He said expressionlessly, "Wushuang, you're a junior of the sect. You can't frame an elder without evidence." Pausing for a moment, the God-refining sect master continued, "Wushuang, this matter is over. However, after the sect competition, there's a mission for you to carry out and you can't refuse. Do you understand?" "Yes." Jian Wushuang nodded. "Very well, then you may all leave." The God-refining sect master returned to his seat and closed his eyes. The 5 grand elders and the other elders looked at each other and left. Wushuang, let's go. Elder Mi Feng patted Jian Wushuang's shoulder and said with a smile, all right. Jian Wushuang left with Elder Mi Feng. Instantly, the main hall fell silent. Only Elder Shen Lian remained. He stared at Jian Wushuang's back and his eyes were filled with hatred. Wushuang, just you wait. Don't be too pleased with yourself. I will catch you sooner or later. Elder Shen Lian gritted his teeth. Within the God-refining sect, Jian Wushuang and Elder Mi Feng were flying in the sky. Humph. Shen Lian is getting more and more overboard. Does he think that he can bully my disciple just because he's from the sect master's faction? Elder Mi Feng's expression was particularly unsightly. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered. Elder Shen Lian's attack on him and the God-refining sect master's test were within his expectations. He saw it coming. However, Jian Wushuang was surprised by Elder Pan Shan's sudden words. Jian Wushuang had a feeling that Grand Elder Pan Shan was not a simple person. This Shen Lian is getting more and more reckless. It seems like it's time for me to find an opportunity to give him a good beating, Elder Mi Feng said from the side. Jian Wushuang was thinking about the Grand Elder Pan Shan. He could not help but ask, Elder Mi Feng, may I ask where this Elder Pan Shan came from? Pan Shan. Elder Mi Feng faltered upon hearing this. After some thought, he muttered, I don't know much about Elder Pan Shan. Even though we are the 5 Grand Elders, Pan Shan has always been a loner and rarely interacts with us. It's said that tens of thousands of chaos cycles ago, the previous sect master brought him back from a remote, forbidden area in the universe. Elder Pan Shan stayed in the God-refining sect for tens of thousands of chaos cycles, never stepping out of the sect. Speaking of which, the number of times that Elder Pan Shan has fought is extremely few. However, every time he strikes, it is a thunderous strike. I'm afraid that in terms of cultivation and strength, he is not below me. Is that so? Jian Wushuang thought for a moment. He had a vague guess. However, whether this guess was correct or not, it would take time to verify. The two of them chatted as they flew in the air. Soon, they arrived at the top of the limestone mountain, outside the corpse cave that belonged to Jian Wushuang. Wushuang, the sect will soon be holding the sect disciple competition. Do you want to participate? If you participate, I'll leave a spot for you. Elder Mi Feng asked. Jian Wushuang thought for a while and shook his head. I don't think so. I've had some enlightenment recently and I'm afraid I'm about to break through. Sect Master has another task for me later. I want to use this time to improve my cultivation. You're about to break through? Elder Mi Feng's eyes immediately lit up when he heard this. He clapped his hands and laughed. Good, good, good. Wushuang, it's still more important for you to break through. As for the disciple competition, it's just an opportunity to show off your talent. With your talent, why do you need the sect disciple competition to prove yourself? Afraid that he would disturb Jian Wushuang's cultivation, Elder Mi Feng left with a smile after giving him a few more instructions. Jian Wushuang looked at Elder Mi Feng's back and could not help but sigh. Within the God-refining sect, he had a rather good impression of Elder Mi Feng. However, the two of them were naturally hostile to each other. It was likely that they would face each other on the off-world battlefield. Shaking his head, Jian Wushuang stopped thinking and strode into the corpse cave. Today, in the sect master's hall, it was really dangerous. If there was even a slight mistake, he would have been killed. If not for Elder Pan Shan's sudden words at the last moment, he would have either lost his life at the hands of the God-refining sect or been chased by them. His life and death hanging by a thread. Pan Shan, tens of thousands of chaos cycles ago, he was brought back by the previous sect master from a remote forbidden area. He rarely made a move. He's reclusive. Jian Wushuang sat cross-legged on the stone bed, his eyes twinkling as he pondered over Elder Mi Feng's description of Elder Pan Shan. After a while, Jian Wushuang shook his head. Even if his guess was true, he would not rashly acknowledge Elder Pan Shan before he gave him a clear signal. Thinking of this, Jian Wushuang slowly closed his eyes and stopped thinking. Then, he started to break through to Intermediate Supreme Realm. Bang, bang, bang. In an instant, Jian Wushuang activated all the divine power in his body. Like boiling water, it started to circulate madly. His divine body made a bone-cracking sound like frying beans. Absorb. Jian Wushuang opened his mouth and inhaled. Suddenly, his body seemed to have turned into a huge whirlpool, swallowing a large amount of void power in one gulp. Then, it was transformed and rushed toward the barrier between the primary and intermediate supreme realms like a rolling wave. Bang! A loud boom exploded in the corpse cave like a bolt of lightning on a clear day. In an instant, the entire limestone mountain shook. If Jian Wushuang had set up hundreds of restrictions to suppress it, the impact would have formed a mighty shock wave and blown the entire limestone mountain away. What's wrong? What happened? Who's breaking through? All of a sudden, the disciples who were condensing divine corpses or cultivating in the numerous corpse caves in the limestone mountain changed their expressions and rushed out of the caves in a panic. The summit. It's the corpse cave at the top of the mountain. Someone is breaking through. I remember that the 7 corpse caves at the top of the mountain were all occupied by the chief disciples. I haven't heard of any chief disciples breaking through recently. No, it's not the chief disciple, it's Wushuang. Wushuang? Is he the one who's been causing a stir in the sect recently, the one with superior aptitude? Not bad. Some time ago, Elder Mi Feng brought Wushuang back to the sect and gave him one of the 7 great corpse caves on the mountain. Bang! In Jian Wushuang's corpse cave, there was another earth-shaking explosion. In an instant, the limestone mountain shook even more violently. Hiss! I remember that Wushuang is only a 3-star or 4-star, right? Why is his breakthrough creating such a terrifying commotion? Could this be a super talent? Even his breakthrough is different from ours. Do you want it to be more extraordinary? From the looks of it, I'm afraid he has broken through a small cultivation realm. Tisk. I'm afraid that when Wushuang breaks through, those 5 head disciples won't be able to sit still any longer. I heard that Jian Wushuang had a short fight with Nu Xiong in the library pavilion some time ago. He defeated Nu Xiong with only one move. In my opinion, this matter should be spread by some busybodies and deliberately exaggerated. But from this, it can be seen that Wushuang's strength is probably not much weaker than those first disciples. Tsk. This time's sect disciple competition is truly exciting. I wonder if Wushuang will participate and what rank he'll get. A series of whispers came from the foot of the limestone mountain. Many disciples of the God-refining sect looked at Jian Wushuang's position in surprise and started to discuss. The enchanting woman named Zhou Sha, who had an extremely graceful figure and curvaceous curves, was also there. She widened her beautiful eyes and looked in Jian Wushuang's direction. This guy, how long has he been in the God-refining sect? He's already about to break through? Rumble. At the peak of the God-refining sect, the wind was blowing and the clouds were rolling. The strong wind was howling and there were flashes of lightning. The ghostly God-refining sect was as bright as day. Jian Wushuang sat cross-legged on the stone bed and released waves of powerful aura. In his divine body, waves of vast divine power were charging toward the last barrier between primary supreme and intermediate supreme. In the past, when Jian Wushuang broke through, he was worried that his aura would leak out and be detected by the almighties of the God-refining sect. However, now that he had converted all his divine power into void power, even the sect master of the God-refining sect would not be able to tell. Rumble. Like waves and tides, the divine power in Jian Wushuang's body was like a turbulent river, surging toward the barrier between the primary and intermediate supreme realms. Wave after wave. Break! Suddenly, Jian Wushuang's eyes opened and a bright light flashed in his eyes. The light grew by 3 inches. A surge of noble spirit rose from Jian Wushuang's body. A terrifyingly sharp aura surged with Jian Wushuang as the center. At that moment, Jian Wushuang's strength had once again made a leap. In just a breath's time, the aura was instantly retracted by Jian Wushuang. He took a deep breath and stood up from the stone bed with a smile on his face. Intermediate supreme realm, done. He could clearly feel that no matter if it was his divine power or physical strength, they were much stronger than before. If this was an increase in his basic attributes, Jian Wushuang could also clearly feel that his degree of compatibility with the great Tao of heaven and earth and his understanding of various divine techniques and powers had become clearer. It was as if an eye-obstructing leaf had been removed. Jian Wushuang's mind became much clearer, which was rare. In fact, Jian Wushuang even had the thought of creating his own divine technique. I've become stronger. Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed with understanding. He was confident that if he were to fight with Supreme Bingyi again, he would definitely win with ease and would not be forced into a corner. It could be said that as long as the invincible Supreme did not appear, he, Jian Wushuang, would be unbeatable in the Supreme Realm. In other words, even in the God-refining sect, as long as the sect master did not appear, even if it was the 5 Grand Elders, Jian Wushuang would not be afraid as long as he had his sword in hand. Now, it's time to increase my strength on the surface. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered and his void power, which was originally 3 stars, instantly doubled and rose to 6 stars. 6 star was equivalent to the ultimate ruler realm in his home universe. Now, I just need to keep refining Supreme Tarot's divine corpse. If I can refine Supreme Tarot's divine corpse to the Supreme Realm, I can join forces with him and go anywhere in the universe. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and started to think about his next plan. Now that he had just broken through to the intermediate Supreme Realm, it would be impossible for him to advance to the senior Supreme Martial Artist level without hundreds of thousands of years of hard work. Thus, the fastest way to increase his strength was to refine the divine corpse of the Supreme Tarot. After all, although the 2 universes seemed calm, the undercurrents were already brewing. No one knew when the war between the 2 universes would break out. Once war broke out, a Supreme could be said to be like an ant that could fall at any time. Without the minimum combat strength of a high Supreme Realm, one would not even be qualified to enter the battlefield. Hence, Jian Wushuang had to take advantage of the buffer period before the war to reach his peak state. Only in this way could he have a chance to protect himself in the great battle. Refine! Jian Wushuang did not stop. After thinking for a while, he took a deep breath, sat down cross-legged, and began to refine the divine corpse of Supreme Tarot. Waves of void power gushed out from Jian Wushuang's hands and pierced into Supreme Tarot's body like fine needles. Like a small fire, it refined Supreme Tarot at a moderate pace. At the foot of the limestone mountain, many of the alarmed disciples walked out of the corpse cave and looked at the peak of the limestone mountain, which was gradually regaining its calm. They looked at each other. He's done with his breakthrough? It seems Wushuang's breakthrough went smoothly. I wonder what cultivation level Wushuang is at right now. Once he breaks through, his divine corpse's night power will surely skyrocket. Ha ha ha. I'm already looking forward to Wushuang's appearance in the sect disciple competition. Many disciples laughed as they discussed the matter. Meanwhile, in the other corpse caves on the top of the limestone mountain, the faces of the void warriors Heiqi, Zhengheng, Shenyang, and others darkened. They knew that this time's entrance disciple selection would most likely have side effects. At the same time, in the sect master's bedroom, which was very far away from the limestone mountain, the head disciple of the sect master's faction, Yen Dan, who was sitting cross-legged in meditation, twitched his eyelids. The void energy fluctuation from the breakthrough just now. Is it Wushuang, the person with extraordinary aptitude that Father spoke of, the one that I've been trying my best to kill? Interesting. It seems like I've finally found an interesting opponent for this year's sect disciple competition. Yen Dan, who was sitting cross-legged in the dark, slowly lifted the corner of his mouth into a sinister smile. Wushuang? Superior aptitude? Ha 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 ha. Finally, there's someone who can arouse my desire to fight. Boom! An 8-star aura spread out from Yen Dan's body. Immediately, this aura became stronger and stronger, stronger and stronger, fiercely charging toward the scar-level void warrior. All of a sudden, because of Jian Wushuang's breakthrough, the situation where between the 5 branches became a little delicate. Among the disciples of the God-refining sect, the discussion about Wushuang began to rise and fall. Time slowly passed. In the blink of an eye, 10 years had passed. In the past 10 years, the already desolate God-refining sect became even more desolate. It was almost impossible to see any disciples of the God-refining sect outside. Everyone was holding their breath and cultivating in seclusion in their own corpse caves, hoping that they could make further progress or research their trump cards. All of this was because he hoped that he would be able to soar into the sky and show off his talents in the upcoming sect disciple competition. This was related to their future cultivation resources, status advancement, and so on. It was extremely important. Finally, on a certain day 10 years later, the sect master of the God-refining sect gave the order and the sect disciple competition began. In an instant, the entire God-refining sect was in an uproar. Countless disciples who had been in seclusion for a long time walked out of the dark corpse caves. Some of them were eager to give it a try, some were certain of victory, and it was clear that they had gained something during this period of closed-door cultivation. There were even more who looked worried and uneasy. At the same time, on the same day that the news of the sect disciples competition had spread, another piece of equally eye-catching news had also spread. In the past 10 years, the dark horse Wuxia, who was praised to be on the verge of breaking the dominance of the 5 branches, and who had emerged from nowhere, had refused to participate in this sect disciple competition. All of a sudden, the God-refining sect disciples who had been waiting for Jian Wuxia to show his strength were dumbfounded. They were so shocked that their eyes almost fell out. Wuxia actually rejected the sect disciple competition? Within the God-refining sect, as the time for the sect disciple competition drew closer, it became more and more lively. The 5 lead disciples, as well as some mysterious disciples who had been in seclusion for many years, came out of the corpse cave. All of a sudden, the entire God-refining sect was in a state of chaos. Normally, at this time, the focus of the discussion would be those who had participated in the sect disciple competition and the candidates who were the favorites to win. However, this time it was a little strange. Then Wuxia. Why is she unwilling to participate in the sect disciple competition this time? Countless disciples of the God-refining sect were confused. At the same time, compared to the doubts of the ordinary disciples, the head disciples of the 5 branches heaved a sigh of relief. Only one person was an exception. Within the God-refining sect, in a side hall of the sect master's sleeping chamber, Yan Dan, the head disciple of the sect master's branch, was cultivating here. There were no candles in the room, so it was dark. He didn't participate in the tournament? Yan Dan suddenly opened his eyes. In his eyes, wisps of black mist gushed out. In front of him, Elder Shen Lian sat cross-legged with a cold expression. Father, Wuxia actually didn't participate in the tournament. What should we do next? Yan Dan asked with a frown. Elder Shen Lian's face was gloomy as he said, I didn't expect Wuxia to be so sneaky as to directly reject the sect competition. This way, it won't be good for us to attack him. Yan Dan nodded his head and could not help but ask in confusion. Father, I'm actually very puzzled as well. Why does Father have such a deep hatred for this Wuxia that you must kill him and be happy? Idiot. I'm doing this to pave the way for you. Elder Shen Lian's eyes widened as he glared at Yan Dan. He snorted coldly. This Wuxia is a rare super talent. Superior aptitude, what kind of concept was that? It could be said that Wuxia already had an entrance ticket for a 6-star level Void Warrior. That day in the Great Hall, the sect master wanted to use the soul-searching technique, but was stopped by the 2 elders Pan Shan and Mi Feng. I'm afraid that if Wuxia wants to fight for the position of sect master, the 2 elders will help him. After a pause, Elder Shen Lian glanced at Yan Dan in disdain and continued, If I don't think of a way to kill him now, do you think you can compete for the sect master's position? Son, remember, everything I've done is to clear the obstacles for you so that you can gradually rise to the top, Elder Shen Lian said after taking a deep breath. Yan Dan laughed in embarrassment and replied, Father, I thought that you truly did suspect that Wuxia came from an alternate universe. That's also one of the reasons. However, Elder Shen Lian nodded his head solemnly. Logically speaking, Jian Wuxia had used void power and passed the test of the trial foundation stone. He should not have suspected Jian Wuxia any longer. However, for some reason, he felt that there was something wrong with Jian Wuxia. This was his intuition. After thinking for a moment, Elder Shen Lian shook his head and said, "All right, let's not talk about this anymore." Although Wu Shuang didn't participate in the sect disciple competition this time, it doesn't mean that we can't do anything to him. Eh? Father, what do you mean by that? Do you mean we still have a chance to kill him? Yan Dan's eyes lit up as he asked curiously. Elder Shan Lian smiled mysteriously at him and said while stroking his beard, "The other day, the sect master said in the hall that he would send Wu Shuang out for a mission after the sect disciple competition. If I'm not wrong, the sect master must want Jian Wushuang to explore the land of gods. At that time, I will add a quota for the mission to the sect master, and that quota will naturally be you. When we leave the god-refining sect, who can still protect that kid Wushuang? At that time, wouldn't his life and death be in your hands?" When he said this, a cold glint flashed in Elder Shin Lian's eyes. "Ha ha ha! Father, this is a brilliant plan." Yan Dan immediately laughed out loud when he heard this. He then chuckled and said, "When Wushuang dies and the current sect master abdicates, won't the god-refining sect be ours?" "Very good." Elder Shin Lian nodded in satisfaction and said, "Son, the sect master has treated you quite well. When the day comes that you become the sect master, don't act like a petty person who has achieved success. You must also be respectful to the current sect master. Understand?" "I understand." The two of them looked at each other and started to imagine what it would be like when they became the sect master. 3 days later, after the speech by the sect master of the god-refining sect, the sect disciple competition officially began under the lead of the 5 grand elders. The competition had officially started. All the disciples of the god-refining sect were focused on the competition. Naturally, no one paid any attention to Jian Wushuang. The entire god-refining sect was in an uproar. Countless disciples amazed the world with a single brilliant feat and soared into the sky, showing their extraordinary talents in the competition. Each of the 5 favorite head disciples was like a dragon in the sky. As soon as they appeared, they instantly attracted everyone's attention and showed their magical abilities. The limestone mountain had become desolate. On this day, an alluring figure rose from the foot of the mountain and flew straight to the top. "Why is that guy still in seclusion?" Josha mumbled and shook her head. Ever since Jian Wushuang met with the sect master and returned to the limestone mountain, he had been in closed-door cultivation, as if he was out of tune with the world outside. "Ah!" With a sigh, Josha lowered her raised arm, which was about to knock on the door, and turned to leave. At the same time, in Jian Wushuang's corpse cave, "Refine!" Jian Wushuang sat cross-legged with a solemn expression. Beads of sweat kept appearing on his forehead. Supreme Tarot's divine corpse floated in front of him, and an invisible flame formed from divine power was burning inside his body. A sudden inspiration from Supreme Tarot divine corpse grew stronger and stronger in Jian Wushuang's body. Jian Wushuang felt that he had become Supreme Tarot and could control everything about him. Rumble! As the divine flame burned, the aura on the divine corpse of Supreme Tarot grew stronger and stronger. The most crucial moment has arrived. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and his face darkened. The flames on the Supreme Tarot divine corpse suddenly became more and more turbulent. Supreme Tarot's divine corpse would soon recover to the Supreme Realm. Once Supreme Tarot's divine corpse recovered to the Supreme Realm, Jian Wushuang's strength would once again increase in an epic manner. Jian Wushuang was confident that as long as he controlled the Supreme Tarot divine corpse that had recovered to the Supreme Realm, in addition to his greatly improved cultivation, he would definitely be able to sweep away all enemies below the invincible Supreme Realm. Even if an invincible Supreme came, as long as it was not in existence at the level of old monsters like the Overlord Patriarch or Supreme Master Gai Fu, Jian Wushuang would still dare to arm wrestle with him. Whoosh! The sound of the invisible divine fire burning the air kept coming from the corpse cave. Jian Wushuang's expression was calm as he carefully controlled the divine fire to refine Supreme Tarot's divine corpse inch by inch. Under this refinement, Jian Wushuang felt that he was getting better at controlling Supreme Tarot's body. It was as if Supreme Tarot's divine corpse had become his second incarnation. Break! The next moment, Jian Wushuang opened his mouth and shouted, As soon as he finished speaking, the Tarot Divine Corpse, which had its eyes closed and was floating quietly in front of him, opened its eyes. An extremely sharp beam of light shot out from Supreme Tarot's eyes. Roar! A heaven-shaking roar came from Supreme Tarot's mouth, forming a rolling sound wave that swept in all directions. In the next moment, Supreme Tarot stood up, opened his mouth and inhaled. Like a whale swallowing water, he sucked in all the divine power flames into his stomach. In an instant, Supreme Tarot's entire body began to exude a blazing golden light. Muffled sounds that sounded like a sledgehammer hitting a drum kept ringing out from his body. Whizzes! In the next moment, Supreme Tarot's aura, which was originally simple and unadorned, began to skyrocket. The most crucial moment has arrived. Jian Wushuang stared at the divine corpse of Supreme Tarot. Whether Supreme Tarot could recover his supreme cultivation level would depend on this moment. Heiqi victory. Zhangheng victory. Nu Xiong victory. Yan Dan victory. As the competition went on, it became more and more intense. Everyone's attention was drawn to the competition. No one paid any more attention to Jian Wushuang. The name Wushuang seemed to have been abandoned in a corner. In this competition, the most praiseworthy were the 5 head disciples, and Yan Dan was leading the scoreboard. The strength of these 5 people was obviously much stronger than the disciples of the same level. Once they fought, they crushed the other disciples with force without any hesitation. Other than that, there was a new talent called Fu Chun, who had appeared out of nowhere and rose to power. This person was also from the God-refining sect who had come for the entrance selection this time. He was one of the people with superb qualifications. He should have been the center of attention long ago, but some time ago, he was overshadowed by Jian Wushuang's superb qualifications, resulting in his reputation not being well known. However, in this competition, he had thoroughly demonstrated his strength, soaring to the sky in one move and defeating his opponents in succession. In the later stages of the sect competition, he even defeated the 2 head disciples, Heiqi and Shenyang, and had the final match with Yan Dan. For a time, he was in the limelight. Everyone was saying that Void Warrior Fu Chun was the strongest disciple that the God-refining sect had recruited this time around and was the true dark horse of this competition. After watching Fu Chun's battle, the God-refining sect master had personally spoken out in praise of him. This caused the rising star, Fu Chun, who was already in the limelight, to become like the sun in the sky. 3 days later, the final battle began. Fu Chun and Yan Dan fought above the 9 heavens. This battle had attracted everyone's attention. Countless people were eagerly waiting to see who would win the competition in the end. This battle lasted for an entire day. The aftershock of their battle actually caused a phenomenon in the heavens and earth. Black smoke rolled up like a tide, covering the clouds and the sun. That rookie called Fu Chun was indeed powerful. Toward the end, he had actually forced Yan Dan to use his strongest trump card. Yan Dan had broken through. On his left shoulder, the 8 stars that represented the ultimate ruler realm strength disappeared, and a long, twisted scar was formed. Yan Dan, advancing to the scar-level Void Master realm. With a single palm strike, Yan Dan sent Fu Chun flying, while Yan Dan stood alone in 9 heavens. The boundless multicolored light was his background, and the sun and moon circled around his body, making him look like a god descending from the heavens. The great Tao of heaven and earth crowned him. Step by step, he descended from the clouds of the 9 heavens, like a new king who had ascended the throne. This sect competition, with Yan Dan as the champion, had drawn the curtains. After the competition ended, the sect master of the God-refining sect, the Void Master Ba Huang, ordered the entire sect to celebrate. He ordered all the disciples to gather outside the sect master's main hall for a banquet. This included the disciples who were not participating in the sect disciple competition this time. In the corpse cave where Jian Wushuang was in the limestone mountain. It's done. Jian Wushuang's face was slightly pale and his eyes were weak. When Supreme Tarot's divine corpse recovered his initial stage supreme cultivation, all his divine power was sucked dry at the moment of his breakthrough. When he saw Supreme Tarot standing in front of him with a sword-like aura, Jian Wushuang could not help but smile. Supreme Tarot's divine corpse had finally recovered to the level of a primary supreme. Jian Wushuang's strength, which had already soared by a large margin, suddenly became like a tiger that had grown wings. His strength had once again taken a leap. Although Supreme Tarot had only recovered his initial stage Supreme Realm cultivation, which was not even 1/10 of his peak, he was still able to crush a large group of Supreme Stage people. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and the smile on his face disappeared. He started to recover his divine power. At this moment, a clear and majestic voice boomed in the sky above the God-refining sect. It was directly transmitted into the ears of everyone in the God-refining sect. The sect-disciple competition has ended. Tomorrow morning, all disciples of the God-refining sect will head to the sect master's main hall to hold a banquet. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes when he heard that. He then remembered that there was a competition between the sect's disciples. Jian Wushuang did not have any regrets about not being able to participate. For him, the so-called sect-disciple competition was just like playing house. Jian Wushuang was not even interested in it. Jian Wushuang closed his eyes and started to recover his divine power. The next day, at 7 a.m., Jian Wushuang opened his eyes and stood up. He left the corpse cave and headed toward the sect master's hall. Supreme Tarot's divine corpse was wearing a black robe. His eyes were closed and he followed behind Jian Wushuang like a shadow. In the sky, countless disciples turned into divine beams and flew toward the sect master's hall from all directions. Isn't that Wushuang? He's finally willing to come out of seclusion. Sigh, I was looking forward to Wushuang's ranking in the sect competition. In the end, Wushuang didn't even participate. What a pity. In my opinion, it's a wise decision for Wushuang to not participate in the sect-disciple competition. Otherwise, if he didn't perform well, wouldn't he be letting down his peerless talent? That's right. What if Wushuang's performance isn't good, and he's defeated right after entering the arena? Wouldn't it be very awkward then? Whispers and discussions could be heard. Nu Xiong was among them, but he did not speak. Instead, he looked at Jian Wushuang with a complicated expression. He had fought with Jian Wushuang for a short time, so he was the only one who knew how terrifying Jian Wushuang's strength was. Jian Wushuang was expressionless, as if he had not heard anything, and he rushed toward the sect master's hall. Just as they were about to reach the sect master's main hall, a clear voice suddenly rang out. Junior brother Wushuang. Then, he saw a beautiful figure flying from behind and standing next to Jian Wushuang. Senior sister Xianxia? Jian Wushuang turned his head and raised his eyebrows slightly. His eyes flashed with surprise. There was something wrong with Xianxia today. Xianxia landed beside Jian Wushuang in one step, her chest rising and falling slightly. She was wearing a tight-fitting red veil and a phoenix coronet on her head, which made her curvaceous figure even more charming. Junior brother Wushuang, you're finally willing to come out of seclusion? Xianxia laughed as she looked at Jian Wushuang from head to toe. Then, her heart suddenly jumped and her eyes gradually revealed a look of surprise. Wushuang, you've broken through to 8-star? Yes, I was just lucky. Jian Wushuang smiled at her. That's amazing. No wonder you didn't participate in this year's sect disciple competition. You must have been conserving your energy to break through to the next cultivation realm. Xianxia stretched out her pink fist and punched Jian Wushuang's chest lightly as she laughed mischievously. Hee, let's not talk about this. Senior sister Xianxia, looking at your outfit, are you going to get married? Jian Wushuang changed the topic. As soon as these words fell, Xianxia's pretty face, which was still in high spirits, suddenly fell. She sighed and said, That's right, Lord Sect Master has already made the decision to betroth me to someone else and become a Tao companion. Oh? Who is so blessed to be able to marry senior sister Xianxia? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and said. Upon hearing this, Xianxia did not reply. Instead, she raised her head and looked at the sect master's hall in the distance. She said in a daze, You should have heard of this person before. He is the son of Elder Shin Lian and also the head disciple of the current sect master's faction, Yen Dan. He was the one who personally proposed to the sect master to become my Tao companion. When Zhou Sha said this, her expression was lonely, as if she was unwilling in her heart. Yan Dan. Jian Wushuang frowned. He had never heard of this person. However, just his identity as the son of Elder Shen Lian made Jian Wushuang slightly unhappy. This Yan Dan is the son of the Elder Shen Lian. He's also the sect master's head disciple and the champion of the sect disciple competition. He has an amazing background and is extremely talented. He has all the glory in the world. You should be happy that you can become Tao companions with him. Why do you look so sad? Don't you like it? Jian Wushuang shook his head and asked casually. Yes. Zhou Sha nodded and replied. But Yan Dan is too arrogant. He doesn't respect anyone. He also likes to form cliques and gangs. His style of doing things is domineering and overbearing. I really don't like him. After Zhou Sha finished speaking with a long sigh, her eyes were immediately filled with sadness. In this world where strength was everything, if one had weak strength and no talent, no matter how good-looking one was, one would just be a chess piece controlled by others. She looked at Jian Wushuang and suddenly, a thought flashed through her mind. Wushuang, I have an idea. Her beautiful eyes lit up and she immediately grabbed Jian Wushuang's arm. She said excitedly, Wushuang, can you help me just this once? With your talent, you're not inferior to Yan Dan at all, and you also have the care of Grand Elder Mifeng. As long as you say during the banquet that we've already pledged to be married, I believe that the sect master will definitely not make things difficult for me after some consideration. What do you think? Jian Wushuang frowned and was about to refuse. What a joke. He was a spy in the God-refining sect. What was the point of starting a family here? Moreover, Lung Rushuang was the only person in his heart from the beginning. He would not be able to hold anyone else. As if she had seen Jian Wushuang's refusal, Zhou Sha quickly said, Junior brother Wushuang, what I said just now was naturally not for you and your senior sister to privately pledge to marry each other, but to deal with the Lord Sect Master. After this matter is over, I will definitely not pester you. You can rest assured. No, Jian Wushuang shook his head. Although his tone was neither warm nor angry, it was filled with an unquestionable tone. Don't mention this matter again. As soon as he finished speaking, Jian Wushuang no longer cared about her. He took a step forward and suddenly, there was an explosion in the void as he rushed toward the sect master's hall. You? Zhou Sha looked at Jian Wushuang's back as if he was running away. She could not help but be stunned. Then, her pretty face was filled with shame and anger. She first looked down at her proud twin peaks, then looked at her pair of white and straight long legs, and stomped her feet in anger. Dumbo! Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Jian Wushuang took a step forward and crossed 100,000 feet. The land and rivers of the God-refining sect seemed to have shrunk under his feet. Soon, Jian Wushuang arrived at the sect master's hall. Outside the sect master's main hall, there was a square that was 100 miles in size. The banquet was held in this square. At this moment, the originally spacious square was filled with disciples of the God-refining sect. Everyone had taken their seats. Seeing Jian Wushuang's arrival, many disciples of the God-refining sect fixed their eyes on him and their pupils shrank. Wushuang is here. You're finally willing to show yourself? The black-robed man behind Wushuang should be his divine corpse, right? It doesn't look like much. Wait. Look. Wushuang seems to have broken through to an 8-star. 8-star? Hiss. How was that possible? I heard that he was only a 4-star when he entered the sect. I'm afraid Wushuang didn't participate in the competition not because he was afraid of losing his reputation, but because he was in a hurry to break through. Whispers could be heard. Wushuang, come to this seat. Elder Mifeng, who was at the front of the square, noticed Jian Wushuang and immediately waved at him with a smile. Yes. Jian Wushuang nodded and strode toward Elder Mifeng. 8-star? Not bad, not bad. You're indeed a person with exceptional talent. This kind of breakthrough speed is simply unheard of. Elder Mifeng clapped his hands and smiled. There were 4 other Grand Elders beside Elder Mifeng. Jian Wushuang had met the Grand Elder in the sect master's hall before. Hence, he was no stranger to him and greeted them one by one. Behind the 4 grand elders, Heiqi, Nu Xiong, and the other head disciples also stood behind him. Heiqi, Zhengheng, and the others sized up Jian Wushuang. They were slightly surprised, but they did not show it on their faces. He was only an 8-star and had just started at the same starting line as them. Only Nu Xiong's pupils shrunk and a chill rose in his heart. For some reason, he could keenly feel that Jian Wushuang's pressure and threat had become even stronger. The previous Jian Wushuang was like a mist that he could not see through. The current Jian Wushuang was like a lightning tribulation that was hiding behind thick dark clouds. It was powerful but did not release. Once it made a move, it would definitely be earth-shattering. Nu Xiong could not help but lower his head. He was even more afraid of Jian Wushuang. Let the banquet begin. With a loud declaration, the sect master of the God-refining sect, Void Master Ba Huang, slowly walked out of the master's hall. Beside him, Yen Dan was not following closely. His expression was filled with respect as he followed behind. Thus, the banquet officially began. The square outside the sect master's hall was in a clamor. As the sect master of the God-refining sect and Yen Dan walked out of the hall, the noisy square suddenly became quiet. The crowd looked at Yen Dan, who was half a body's length behind the sect master, and their pupils shrank slightly. The sect master has brought Yen Dan to the banquet alone. I'm afraid that the next sect master will be senior brother Yen Dan. Everyone looked at each other and thought the same. Yen Dan walked behind the God-refining sect master, the 8th extreme void master. He raised his head and glanced at the crowd, his face full of arrogance. Of course, he had the right to be arrogant. Not only did he have a big-shot father, but he was also the last disciple of a 6-scar void master. At the same time, he had broken through to the scar level. In the void universe, he was a rare genius. That person is Wushuang. Yen Dan's eyes looked around and then fell on Jian Wushuang, who was standing behind Elder Mi Feng. 8-star? Not bad, no wonder father wants him dead. If he's allowed to continue growing, he might be able to threaten my position one day. Yen Dan laughed coldly in his heart. His eyes continued to turn and fell on Jiusha's face, and a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes. It had to be said that Jiusha was indeed extremely beautiful. Even among the great holy maidens and goddesses, she was the most outstanding and the pearl that stood tall among the chickens. Today, she was wearing a tight red dress and a phoenix coronet. She looked like an immortal. Besides the charm between her brows, there was also a bit of coldness and elegance. Jiusha also noticed the lust in Yen Dan's eyes. Her face turned cold and she lowered her head to avoid looking at him. We pay our respects to the sect master. After a while, the thousands of disciples of the God-refining sect knelt down and cheered. There's no need to be so formal today. Void Master Ba Huang nodded his head in satisfaction. Looking at his disciples below him, he could not help but smile. This would be the future pillar of the God-refining sect. The banquet began, and everyone toasted each other. The atmosphere warmed up in an instant. After half a cup of wine, the God-refining sect master, who was sitting at the head of the table, put down his wine cup and said with a smile, "Today's banquet is because there are 3 happy events. The first thing I'm happy about is the sect disciple competition this time. I've seen that our God-refining sect's younger generation is outstanding and not poor. It's enough to last forever. Second, I would like to congratulate my last disciple, Yen Dan, for successfully attaining the Great Tao and breaking through to the scar level. He is now another divine general for our God-refining sect. Your future will surely shine." The third joy is also related to Yen Dan. I hereby announce that the Lanyue branch's disciple Jiusha will be betrothed to my disciple Yen Dan. From now on, the 2 of them will become Tao companions and support each other. After the God-refining sect master finished speaking, the crowd immediately burst out in cheers and agreement. Seeing this, the God-refining sect master nodded slightly and then looked at Jiusha. Jiusha lowered her head and bit her lower lip tightly. Her hands clenched her long dress uneasily, and there was no joy on her face. Looking at this scene, The God-refining sect master's smiling face slowly fell. Josha, why don't you kneel down and thank the sect master for the good marriage he has given you? It's a blessing that you've cultivated for 3 lifetimes to be able to become Tao companions with Yen Dan. Why don't you quickly thank him? Elder Lanue, who had been paying attention to the God-refining sect master's expression, immediately called out. Lanue was the only female Grand Elder among the 5 Grand Elders. She was also the one with the lowest cultivation among the Grand Elders. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that Yen Dan had broken through to the scar level, and his future was bound to be limitless. If there were no accidents, he was already a definite candidate for the next sect master. Lanue really did not want to offend Yen Dan unless it was necessary. Josha was unmoved. You little girl, what do you want to do? Lan Yu's face turned stern. Josha's head lowered even further. She bit her lower lip hard, as if she was making a decision. The next moment, she raised her head and said firmly, Elder Lan Yu, sect master, I don't want to become Tao companions with senior brother Yen Dan. As soon as she finished speaking, the entire place was in an uproar. Elder Lan Yu's face turned ashen in an instant. The God-refining sect master's face also turned extremely ugly. He did not expect that an ordinary disciple of the God-refining sect would dare to disobey his orders. The smile on Yen Dan's face also slowly froze. Face smacking. This was a slap to his face in front of the entire God-refining sect. Impudent. The God-refining sect master's right hand slammed heavily on the armrest of his chair, and a trace of pressure was suddenly released, pressing down on Josha. What was the cultivation base of the God-refining sect master? 6 Scars Void Master, the giant arm that stood at the peak of the entire Void universe. However, Josha was only a star-level Void warrior who had not even reached the scar level, so how could she resist this pressure? In an instant, Josha knelt on the ground, her pretty face pale. If the God-refining sect master had not carefully controlled the strength of the pressure, she would have been crushed into dust and her soul would have been destroyed. Let me ask you, why are you unwilling to become Tao companions with my son? Elder Shin Lian chided him with a gloomy face. Josha trembled and raised her head with difficulty. She gritted her teeth and said, reporting to Elder Shin Lian and Lord Sect Master, it's not that Josha is unwilling to become Tao companions with senior brother Yen Dan, but my heart already belongs to someone else and he has made a private pledge to marry me. As soon as this sentence came out, the entire hall was in an uproar again. Countless people looked at each other. In the God-refining sect, who did not know that the Josha was already regarded as a forbidden property by Yen Dan? Who would dare to snatch Yen Dan's woman? Cheap slave. Let me ask you, who's the person you privately pledged to marry? Yen Dan roared in a low voice. His face was already filled with a ferocious look and his eyes were filled with killing intent. The God-refining sect master also frowned. It's... Josha's eyes trembled as she looked at the expressionless Jian Wushuang, who was standing behind Elder Mi Feng. She did not care about her life at all. She gritted her teeth and said, it's junior brother Wushuang. After she finished speaking, she lowered her head and did not dare to look at the crowd, let alone meet Jian Wushuang's eyes. What? It's Wushuang. No wonder Wushuang and Josha didn't participate in the sect disciple competition. There's a reason behind this. During the sect disciple competition, I saw Josha go to the top of the limestone mountain a few times. I was curious why Josha went to the top of the mountain when she lived at the foot of the limestone mountain. Now that I think about it, I'm afraid she's going to find Wushuang. In an instant, the entire square first fell into a brief dead silence, and then suddenly erupted. Chatter, chatter, chatter. Everyone in the crowd looked at Jian Wushuang. The crowd looked at Jian Wushuang with an extremely strange expression. Wushuang, a person with supreme talent, was also the person who Grand Elder Mi Feng had personally welcomed into the sect. TSK, the person who took Yen Dan's woman is actually Wushuang. There's going to be a good show to watch now. One of them is the most talented person in the sect, and the other is the leader of the disciples, the next sect master candidate in the eyes of the sect master. Now, it's up to Lord Sect Master to make his choice. A series of discussions sounded. Yan Dan suddenly turned his head and stared at Jian Wushuang with a fierce look in his eyes. Elder Shin Lian's face also darkened instantly. On the other hand, the God-refining sect's sect master, Void Master Ba Huang, who was originally a little angry, calmed down and frowned. Other than being Yan Dan's master, he was more of the God-refining sect's sect master. What he paid attention to was the art of balance. Previously, Yan Dan had asked him for Jiusha and wanted him to personally ask for Jiusha and Yan Dan to become Dao companions. In his opinion, it was like a child asking for a beloved toy from him. Naturally, he could not do it. However, now, with Wushuang in the middle, the situation was different. It was like a scale. Originally, the weight of the Jiusha and Yan Dan were completely different. Everything was leaning toward Yan Dan, so he did not mind agreeing to Yan Dan's request. However, with the addition of Wushuang, the weights on both sides of the scale suddenly became different. To be honest, as the God-refining sect master, he did not have any ill intentions toward Jian Wushuang. After all, Jian Wushuang had passed the Trial Foundation Stone's verification and had a peerless talent. Previously, he had mentioned the soul-searching technique in the sect master's hall only because he suspected that Jian Wushuang was a spy sent by the Divine Power Universe. From the perspective of the big picture, he was naturally better off than Jian Wushuang. After all, Jian Wushuang was a member of the God-refining sect. If Jian Wushuang was doing well, the God-refining sect would naturally be well. The two of them complemented each other and were not enemies. If there were no accidents, Jian Wushuang would definitely become one of the pillars of the God-refining sect in the future. For a moment, the God-refining sect master did not know what to say. If Jiusha had really become Dao companions with Jian Wushuang, then the matter of Jiusha and Yan Dan had to be considered carefully. After a long while, he looked at Jian Wushuang with a frown and said in a deep voice, "Wushuang, is what Jiusha said true?" As soon as the sect master finished his words, Yan Dan looked at Jian Wushuang and said coldly, "Junior brother Wushuang, aren't you going a little too far?" Jian Wushuang remained silent and expressionless. However, in his heart he was already extremely angry. What was this Jiusha trying to do? As early as when they were high up in the sky outside the sect master's main hall, Jiusha had opened her mouth and begged him to put on a show with her and reject the marriage between her and Yan Dan. However, Jian Wushuang had rejected her very clearly. He did not expect Jiusha to be so selfish. She did not care about his feelings at all and publicly announced that he had pledged to marry him in the main hall. Jian Wushuang understood that he had been used by Jiusha. As for why Jiusha chose him, it was not because he was too charming. The two of them had only met 3 times, so there was no charm. The reason was simple. What Jiusha had her eyes on was Jian Wushuang's peerless talent. She believed that between Yan Dan and him, the God-refining sect master would definitely have a hard time choosing. However, she had never thought that after this matter was over, she could just apologize to Jian Wushuang and leave as if nothing had happened. But what would happen to Jian Wushuang? Jian Wushuang would definitely offend Yan Dan and become a thorn in the father and son's side. If it was an ordinary disciple, he would not be far from death if he incurred such hatred. Jian Wushuang's thoughts flashed quickly. He was naturally not afraid of Yan Dan and his father. To him, even if he were to tie Elder Shin Lian and Yan Dan together, they would not be enough to deal with him. However, he did not like the feeling of being used as a shield. Jian Wushuang took a step forward and said in a deep voice, "Reporting to the sect master, Senior Sister Jiusha mentioned something about a private marriage. This disciple, I don't know anything. Chatter." As soon as he finished speaking, the crowd went into an uproar again. He had no idea at all. These words were simply amazing. Everyone's expressions changed. Jiusha, who was kneeling on the ground, felt as if a knife had been stabbed into her heart. Her delicate body trembled and she almost fell to the ground. Her face turned pale. Looking at Jian Wushuang's cold and calm face, she could not help but laugh bitterly. "Are you really that heartless?" Yan Dan, Elder Shin Lian, and the God-refining sect master were all stunned. Even Elder Mi Feng, who was standing next to Jian Wushuang, was surprised. Wu Shuang, are you saying this because you fear Yan Dan and the others? Don't worry. If that Zhou Sha is really the woman you fancy, I will definitely help you get her even if I have to throw away my face. Elder Mi Feng transmitted his voice to Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang could not help but feel touched. Elder Mi Feng was a very competent elder. If Jian Wushuang had been born in this universe, he might have treated Elder Mi Feng the same way he treated Supreme Bloodwave. It was a pity that the two of them were not on the same path. Sighing in his heart, Jian Wushuang shook his head and replied, Elder Mi Feng, there's no need to do this. I really have nothing to do with senior sister Zhou Sha. All right, Elder Mi Feng nodded. Since Jian Wushuang had already said so, he would naturally not force him. Ha 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 ha, lowly servant. I'd like to see who can still stand up for you now? Yan Dan sneered. He first glared at Zhou Sha, then turned to look at Jian Wushuang with a sneer in his eyes. He looked at Jian Wushuang with satisfaction as if he was saying, You're smart. Jian Wushuang could not help but frown. He did not like Zhou Sha's actions, but he was equally displeased with Yan Dan's gaze. Sect Master, I beg you, please allow me to bring Zhou Sha back now. Yan Dan turned around and said to the God-refining Sect Master, Yes, go ahead. The God-refining Sect Master nodded his head with a calm expression. The current outcome was even better for him. Thank you, Sect Master. Yan Dan cupped his hands at the God-refining Sect Master, then looked at Zhou Sha again. He stretched out the corner of his mouth and licked his split lips. His lustful and cruel eyes swept over Zhou Sha's enchanting and perfect figure. After laughing, he stretched out his palm and grabbed Zhou Sha. Suddenly, in the midst of Zhou Sha's screams, she flew up and fell into Yan Dan's hand. Yan Dan picked up Zhou Sha and walked out of the hall. However, just as he was about to pass by Jian Wushuang, he seemed to have thought of something and suddenly stopped. Wushuang. Yan Dan stopped and turned his head to look at Jian Wushuang. What are you doing? Jian Wushuang replied expressionlessly. Yan Dan looked around, then lowered his voice and said, Wushuang, I know that there must be some unspeakable business between you and this lowly servant. However, you're quite tactful this time and know to avoid the limelight. I'll let you off for the time being, but you must remember that after this matter is over, there will be debts to be settled between you and me. At that time, not only will this lowly slave die, but you will also have to be my slave and servant to erase the humiliation I've suffered today. After he finished speaking, Yan Dan sneered and planned to leave. Jian Wushuang's denial just now had indirectly helped him out of the predicament. Not only did he not feel grateful to Jian Wushuang, but he also felt even more resentful. As proud as he was, Yan Dan was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Not only did he have a scar-level father who was an elder of the God-refining sect, but he was also accepted as the closed-door disciple of the sect master after he showed his talent. He became the head disciple of the entire God-refining sect. What kind of noble status was this? As a result, he developed a haughty and overbearing character. Since he was young, everything had been smooth sailing for him and he had never been rejected by anyone. However, today, Zhou Sha, a mere woman, had actually rejected him in public and even announced that she had already made a private pledge to marry someone else. To him, how humiliating was this? After that, although Jian Wushuang denied it, in his eyes, Jian Wushuang's words were like a knife that stabbed his heart. What did he mean? Could it be that I am only worthy of something that you, Wushuang, don't care about? Therefore, he, who already had a grudge against Jian Wushuang, hated him even more and wanted to kill him. Most importantly, he absolutely did not believe that Zhou Sha had nothing to do with Jian Wushuang. He had already made a plan. When he returned to his bedroom, he would first teach Zhou Sha a lesson. Through the dual cultivation method, he would directly suck Zhou Sha dry and let her know the price of humiliating his Yan Dan. After that, he would find an opportunity to cut Jian Wushuang into pieces. On one hand, he would cut off the possibility of Jian Wushuang fighting for the position of sect master with him. On the other hand, he would vent his hatred. This person and Elder Shen Lian's viciousness could be said to be from the same line. Just as Yan Dan made this decision and was about to leave, Suddenly, "Stop!" Jian Wushuang said calmly. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone who thought that the farce had come to an end could not help but be stunned. Even Yen Dan, who had already stepped out of the square, squinted his eyes and turned around slowly. He looked at Jian Wushuang and asked with a gloomy expression, "Wushuang, what are you doing?" Among the crowd, only Zhou Sha, who was pale and in despair, suddenly showed joy on her face and looked at Jian Wushuang. At the same time, she was excited and quickly sent a message to Jian Wushuang. Wushuang, I was forced to do such a stupid thing just now. Wushuang, I apologize to you. But I beg you, save me. Save me or I'm really going to die. Jian Wushuang turned a deaf ear to her words and looked at Yen Dan indifferently. He said calmly, "Try saying what you just said to me again." He had originally planned not to interfere in this matter and let Yen Dan leave obediently. However, Yen Dan had to run to him and provoke him, wanting to make him his slave. He, Jian Wushuang, had never backed down in his life. Yen Dan squinted his eyes and the corners of his mouth curled up. He asked, "Wushuang, what if I say it again? Do you still want to stop me?" "Stop you?" Jian Wushuang sneered and took a step forward. He instantly appeared in front of Yen Dan and said indifferently, "If you say it again, you won't be able to walk out of this door today. You dare." Hearing this, Yen Dan's heart was instantly filled with anger, and his eyes lit up. A monstrous aura that belonged to the scar level exploded from Yen Dan's body. In an instant, the entire square was filled with wind and clouds. The pressure of a scar-level void warrior instantly descended on the entire square, forming an upside-down tornado around him. The pressure was like a ferocious tiger that was ready to devour its prey as it pounced on Jian Wushuang. "Is that all?" Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and his aura also exploded. The pressure of an 8-star void warrior spread out. The pressure was far less terrifying than the Yen Dan. Even Jian Wushuang, who was standing in front of the Yen Dan, felt like a boat in the sea of anger and could capsize at any time. However, even so, Jian Wushuang did not move his feet at all. It was as if he was a stabilizing force that would not budge no matter how great the waves were. "You're looking for death." Seeing this, Yen Dan was even more furious. First, he was rejected and humiliated by Zhou Sha and was almost made a cuck. Now he was blocked by Jian Wushuang, who faced him head-on. At this moment, how could he still hold back? A killing intent suddenly leaped out. Bang! The void behind Yen Dan was suddenly torn open, and a green arm stretched out from the void to grab Jian Wushuang. This arm was extremely shriveled, with meridians crisscrossing each other. The 5 fingernails were pitch black, long and sharp. In front of this grab, the entire void was like paper instantly torn apart. The owner of the hand was Yen Dan's divine corpse, Dehuai. Everyone's eyelids twitched when they saw this. Yen Dan is attacking Wushuang. I'm afraid Wushuang is going to suffer this time. If Senior Yen Dan had not broken through to the scar level, the two of them might have been able to fight. But now that Senior Yen Dan has broken through to the scar level, no matter how talented Wushuang is, 10 of him won't be enough to defeat Senior Yen Dan. The crowd quickly discussed. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered and he quickly thought about it. Yen Dan's overbearing claw was like a child's sword dance in Jian Wushuang's eyes. It was full of flaws. Even if he did not use his true cultivation and only used the strength of an 8-star void warrior, he would be able to break it. Forget it. If I concentrate on developing in the God-refining sect and never reveal my strength, I'm afraid I won't be able to climb to the top of the Void Universe in a short time. Only those who are at the peak of the Void Universe are qualified to know the true secrets. I might as well show some of my strength today. This way, it'll be easier for me to level up and find out about the arrangements of the Void Universe against the Divine Power Universe. Thinking of this, Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed with a touch of coldness. Divine Corpse, come. Whoosh! In an instant, a figure in a black robe, with only his eyes exposed, appeared in front of Jian Wushuang. An extremely sharp sword chi burst out from the figure. This figure was the Supreme Tarot Divine Corpse that had recovered to the primary Supreme Realm. Whoosh! As soon as the divine corpse of Supreme Tarot appeared, the sharp and earth-shaking aura instantly shocked everyone. This is the divine corpse of Wuxia. It's said that this divine corpse is the strongest divine corpse on Coffin Mountain. Even the sect master and the 5 grand elders couldn't refine it. Scar level aura. This divine corpse has already reached the scar level. No wonder Wuxia isn't afraid of senior brother Yen Dan. He has this backing. Bang, bang. The corpse's expression was numb, and his movements were stiff. He raised 2 of his fingers to form a sword finger and pointed at the shriveled arm that was coming from the void. In an instant, endless sword chi burst out from the tip of the divine corpse's finger. Boom! An earth-shattering sound rang out, and the arm that had torn everything retracted instantly as if it had been electrocuted. Then, Yen Dan seemed to have suffered some kind of backlash, and he took 3 steps back, his face flushed. It was not over yet. Another painful groan came from the void behind Yen Dan. A shriveled divine corpse with black hair fell out of the void. This divine corpse was De Huai. Jian Wuxia defeated the enemy with 1 finger. In an instant, everyone cried out in alarm. They did not expect that Yen Dan, the first disciple of the sect master who had just been crowned as the number 1 disciple and had the scar-level power, would be forced back by the tarot divine corpse with a single finger. Bastard! Yen Dan's face was livid. He stared at Jian Wuxia and growled, "I was just careless just now. Let's do it again." After he finished speaking, he began to gather all his void power crazily, and the entire square began to shake. "All right." Jian Wuxia squinted his eyes and the coldness in his eyes grew. Just as the 2 of them were confronting each other, "Enough!" The God-refining sect master frowned. Immediately, his words were absolute. As soon as he said those words, the square, which had been like a raging sea, suddenly calmed down. An extremely vast and powerful force separated Jian Wuxia and Yen Dan. Sect master! Seeing this, Yen Dan felt as if he had finally gathered his strength and wanted to throw a punch. But it was as if he had hit cotton. He felt extremely aggrieved. Sect master! Let me teach Wuxia a good lesson. You want to teach him a lesson? Don't you think you've embarrassed yourself enough? The God-refining sect master snorted and looked at Jian Wuxia. "Wuxia, let me ask you, what was the meaning of this before? Why did you block Yen Dan's path?" Jian Wuxia's purpose of showing off his strength had been achieved. Therefore, when he saw the God-refining sect master interrupt his battle with Yen Dan, he did not feel much. He cupped his hands and replied calmly, "Sect master, I stopped senior brother Yen Dan because he provoked me when he passed by me just now. He said that he wanted to make me his slave. I was so angry that I did what I did." When the God-refining sect master heard this, he could not help but look at Yen Dan, his face darkening. "Look at you, you could have just left obediently after getting what you wanted, but you had to be clever and provoke others. Now, you've put yourself in a difficult position, haven't you?" Shaking his head, the sect master cursed in his heart. "What an idiot!" After taking a deep breath, the God-refining sect master looked at Jian Wuxia and replied, "All right, you and Dan Yen are from the same sect. In the future, you will both be the pillars of my God-refining sect. You can't get into a big fight over a small verbal conflict. Do you understand? All right, this matter is over. Let's end the banquet." The God-refining sect master stood up and shook his head. "Yes." As the God-refining sect master stood up, the other disciples in the square naturally did not dare to remain seated. They all stood up to send the sect master off. "Wuxia, you deserve to die." Yen Dan glared at Jian Wuxia and the veins on his forehead popped out because of his anger. If they were not in the God-refining sect, he would not have been able to suppress his impulse and would have killed Jian Wuxia. "Wuxia, don't worry. We still have a long way to go. I'll slowly settle the matter between us in the future." With that, Yen Dan strode away. A touch of disgust flashed in his eyes when he saw Jiuxia. It was this woman who had made him lose face today. He was afraid that if he took her back to be his Tao companion, he would only become a joke. It would be like he had picked up something that Jian Wuxia did not want. "And you, lowly servant, Today's matter was all because of you. After I kill Wushuang, I'll slowly deal with you. With a cold snort, Yen Dan stomped on the ground with his right foot. The floor beneath him cracked, and a small pit appeared. He transformed into a beam of light and shot into the sky, disappearing from the square outside the sect master's hall. When Jiusha saw Yen Dan leave, her nervous heart finally eased. She looked at Jian Wushuang gratefully and said thank you softly. Jian Wushuang shook his head and did not pay much attention to her. After exchanging a glance with Elder Mi Feng, he walked in the direction that the God-refining sect master had left. He still remembered that the God-refining sect master had once told him that after the sect disciple competition was over, there would be a mission for him. In the sect master's hall, the God-refining sect master sat at the head of the table. He looked at Wushuang, who did not leave with the crowd but followed him into the sect master's hall, and nodded. Wushuang, I originally wanted to wait for you to rest for a few days before telling you about the mission. Since you've come, I will tell you now. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and nodded. Sect master, please speak. All right. The sect master of the God-refining sect looked into the distance. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he seemed to be thinking about what to say in his mind. After a while, he said, Wushuang, do you know of the land of gods in our universe? The land of gods? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows. He had a feeling that what the God-refining sect master was about to say was one of the top secrets of the Void universe. That's right. Most people don't know about the land of gods, so I'll tell you about it today. The God-refining sect master's eyes flickered and he muttered, the land of gods is not one of the forbidden areas of our universe. It was formed after birth. About tens of thousands of void eras ago, there were a few powerful beings from another universe that came to our universe. These beings were from the same place as those people who were with you when you first joined. These alien races have unfathomable motives and are ruthless. After their identities were exposed, they started a massacre in our void universe. They are extremely powerful, and each of their cultivation is at least at the 6-scar level like me. One of them has an even more unfathomable cultivation base, and his methods are strange. He has the power to suppress the life source, and he's countless times more powerful than me. As the God-refining sect master spoke slowly, Jian Wushuang was shocked. What is this? The void universe that came tens of thousands of void eras ago. They came from the same place as supreme martial artist Gongyang and the others. All of them are at least at the 6-scar level, which means they are invincible supremes. One of them is several times stronger than the God-refining sect's sect master. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered and his thoughts began to run quickly. The time axis of the void universe and the divine power universe that Jian Wushuang was in was similar. Tens of thousands of chaos cycles ago. It should have been around the time when the Great Catastrophe War had just ended. At that time, only that group of people had entered the void universe and had disappeared without a trace. Even though the God-refining sect master's words were rather obscure, to Jian Wushuang, it was obvious. The palace master of the Divine Life Palace. If Jian Wushuang had guessed correctly, the alien race the God-refining sect master had mentioned was none other than the team led by the palace master of the Divine Life Palace that had disappeared into the void universe. Jian Wushuang's mind was filled with thoughts, but he pretended to be listening. He continued to listen to the sect master of the God-refining sect talk about the land of gods. He understood that this land of gods was very likely to be inextricably linked to the disappearance of the Divine Life Palace's palace master. When the identity of this group of foreign races was exposed, our void universe immediately summoned the giant arms of the great beings at the 6-scar level and above to kill these foreign races. This time, almost half of the 6-scar level void masters in our universe were gathered to fight with this group of alien races in the small ring star field. Speaking of which, although the cultivation base of this group of outsiders is similar to ours, other than the strongest person who can suppress the life source, the rest of them are weaker than us in terms of combat strength. Very soon, a great battle broke out. Almost all of the alien races were killed, and only the strongest of these aliens managed to escape with 2 or 3 people. Then, I don't know what kind of technique the strongest person used, but he actually dominated a star field and refined it into a forbidden area. He set up 999 restrictions, locking himself and the remaining 2 or 3 6-star level experts in it. Not only was he unable to take a step out, but we also couldn't get in no matter how hard we tried. Moreover, the higher one's cultivation is, the stronger the rejection force will be when they step into the forbidden area. On the contrary, those with lower cultivation will not trigger the terrifying restrictive spells that can kill immortals and gods. As time passed, that forbidden land was left behind. We called it the Land of Gods. The God-refining sect master said slowly. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang could not help but squint his eyes. He finally knew the whereabouts of the Divine Palace Master. Back then, outside the Divine Life Palace, Overlord Patriarch had said that the Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace had been trapped somewhere in the Void Universe. He must have been referring to this Land of Gods. It was no wonder that the Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace could not return. Lord Sect Master, the mission you mentioned must be related to the Land of Gods, right? Jian Wushuang asked despite knowing the answer. That's right. The Sect Master of the God-refining sect nodded and replied in a deep voice. It's been tens of thousands of void eras since that group of foreign people was trapped in the Land of Gods, and our Lord Void God used a great divine ability to seal off all the energy supplies in that area. In other words, those foreign people who were heavily injured will never recover from their injuries. For the first tens of thousands of void eras, we could still sense that the outsiders were trying to break through the seal and escape, but in the last 10,000 void eras, they've quieted down. They've never tried to break through the seal again. They're probably already like a lamp that's on its last legs. Wushuang, your mission this time is to enter the restriction and see what the situation is like. First, your cultivation is only at the star level, so the restrictions inside will not be triggered at all, and you can walk in safely. That group of outsiders has been worn down by tens of thousands of void eras. Even if they haven't fallen, they probably don't have much power left, so they won't be much of a threat to you. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and thought for a moment. He nodded and replied, I understand. Very good. Then, Wushuang, you may leave first. You're not the only one going to the Land of Gods to explore this time. I'll also choose some disciples from the sect to go with you. Other than that, I'm afraid that the other top forces will also send their own heaven's favorites. Don't be careless and embarrass the God-refining sect. The sect master said slowly. Yes. After a few more words from the God-refining sect master, Jian Wushuang took his leave. After returning to the corpse cave on the top of the limestone mountain, Jian Wushuang immediately opened a ward to seal off all auras. To him, even if the God-refining sect master did not allow him to go to the Land of Gods, he would still find a reason to go. The Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace had stayed in the Void Universe for tens of thousands of chaos cycles. Even if he had been trapped in the Land of Gods for nearly all his time, he must have known a lot about the Void Universe. This was of utmost importance. In addition, Jian Wushuang also had some doubts and wanted to ask the Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace, provided that the Palace Master had not died. For example, what was going on with his life level? The more he cultivated, the more he realized that his life level as a special life form far surpassed that of a perfect special life form. Or rather, it was not a perfect level special life form at all. His life level had far surpassed the perfect level. After that, Jian Wushuang used the token given to him by the Cosmos God to activate the water mirror and report the matter to Cosmos God. Regarding the Land of Gods, Cosmos God did not seem surprised. It was obvious that he had already known about this. He only told Jian Wushuang to be careful and then hung up the call. It was late at night. Jian Wushuang sat cross-legged on the stone bed and refined the tarot divine corpse. Knock! 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 Just as Jian Wushuang was immersed in his cultivation and preparing to go to the Land of Gods, an unexpected person came and knocked on the door of Jian Wushuang's corpse cave. After removing the magic barrier, Jian Wushuang frowned and looked out of the corpse cave's door. He was suddenly stunned. Outside the corpse cave, under the blood-colored moonlight, an old man with white hair and a white beard, his face full of age spots, was standing quietly at the entrance of the corpse cave with his hands behind his back. Elder Pan Shan? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and asked in confusion. Pan Shan, one of the 5 great grand elders. What was he doing here? Wushuang, I have something to tell you. Am I not welcome? Pan Shan's expression was indifferent. He glanced at Jian Wushuang and said, Elder Pan Shan, what are you saying? Come in and sit. Jian Wushuang smiled and shook his head. He then stood up and extended his hand to invite Elder Pan Shan to enter the corpse cave. In the God-refining sect, a blood moon hung in the sky. The shadow of the moon was sparse, and the roars of the corpses could be heard continuously. Elder Pan Shan strode into a corpse cave on the peak of the limestone mountain and sat down cross-legged with Jian Wushuang. Elder Pan Shan, is there a reason for your late-night visit? Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered as he spoke. He had a vague guess about Elder Pan Shan. As for whether his guess was correct, he would have to see why Elder Pan Shan had come to find him so late at night. Elder Pan Shan looked at Jian Wushuang and asked, Wushuang, this old man has a few questions to ask you. Elder Pan Shan, please speak. Jian Wushuang nodded. All right. Elder Pan Shan acknowledged and pondered for a moment. He then asked, Wushuang, you've heard about the other races in the universe, right? Yes, I have. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang's eyes lit up and he immediately replied, All right, you said that you met those other race members on the way to our sect, and have never known them before. Now, let me ask you, which star field did you meet them from? Feng Luo Starfield. Jian Wushuang answered without any hesitation. He had long expected that someone would question him in detail, so he naturally did his homework. The Feng Luo Starfield was neither too far nor too close to the God-refining sect. There were not many people here, and it was unlikely that anyone would coincidentally stay in the Feng Luo Starfield. Good. Then this old master will ask you again, which starfield do you come from? Elder Pan Shan nodded and asked again. Jian Wushuang's eyes narrowed and he did not answer. Instead, he stared at Elder Pan Shan and asked, Elder Pan Shan, why did you come here this time? Why don't you just speak directly? There's no need to beat around the bush. After all, he was not from the Void Universe and could not withstand a detailed interrogation. As for Elder Pan Shan, although he suspected that Pan Shan came from the Divine Power Universe, this matter was of great importance and he could not afford to gamble. If his guess was even the slightest bit wrong, then it was very likely that he would fall short of success and lose everything. He had to be cautious. Wushuang, you don't need to care about what I mean. You just need to answer truthfully, Elder Pan Shan said emotionlessly. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang fell silent. After a long while, he took a deep breath and replied, The Liang Star Field. The Liang Star Field? Hearing this, Elder Pan Shan laughed and shook his head. Wushuang, oh Wushuang, the Liang Starfield and the Feng Luo Starfield are in the south and north of the God-refining sect. If you came from the Liang Starfield, how did you meet those other races in the Feng Luo Starfield? Hearing this, Jian Wushuang's eyes turned cold. Just as he was about to speak, Elder Pan Shan continued, Also, Wushuang, our universe isn't that big, but it's not that small either. You didn't just rely on your talent and closed-door cultivation to become a star-level void warrior. You must have left traces of your growth in the universe. But I have asked around and have never heard of your name, Wushuang. If you still want to argue, I can personally go to the Liang Starfield and see if there's anyone who knows you. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang slowly narrowed his eyes. His 5 fingers touched the hilt of the Tarot Divine Sword, and his thumb gently rubbed the hilt of the Tarot Divine Sword. The sound of a sword rang out. After a moment, Jian Wushuang seemed to have thought of something. He let go of the hilt of the Tarot Divine Sword and smiled. Elder Pan Shan, if you have anything to say, just say it. Jian Wushuang finally understood. If Elder Pan Shan had really come to expose him, he would not have come alone. The God-refining sect master would have led the way and set up an ambush in the surroundings. However, the divine power he spread out did not detect any signs of an ambush outside. When Elder Pan Shan heard this, he became silent. He looked at Jian Wushuang for a long time before he said slowly, "You guys were too careless this time. You weren't careful enough. If the God-refining sect really had the intention to investigate, you wouldn't have been able to hide at all." Jian Wushuang's expression did not change, but his heart skipped a beat. This sentence was already equivalent to a clear indication. "I know, but it's an emergency. I don't have time to plan everything out," Jian Wushuang replied in a deep voice. Elder Pan Shan sighed and seemed to understand Jian Wushuang's dilemma. He replied, "Don't worry. On the day you joined the sect, I have already taken care of all these things for you. Some time ago, the God-refining sect sent people to the Liang starfield to verify your information. I have also arranged for them to handle everything." Pausing for a moment, Elder Pan Shan turned his head and looked through the corpse cave into the endless starry sky. It was as if he was looking at another universe from this universe. He seemed to be reminiscing and said in a hoarse voice, "Wushuang, how's the situation under that starry sky?" Jian Wushuang did not answer. Elder Pan Shan did not ask any further. He knew that even at this moment, Jian Wushuang still had a trace of wariness in his heart. This was understandable. After all, from Jian Wushuang's point of view, he could not rule out the possibility that Pan Shan had played him at his own game and asked him a question in reverse. However, Elder Pan Shan was mumbling to himself. "Back then, the 7 of us were ordered to come to this universe. We thought that we would be able to investigate the situation of this universe very quickly, but we didn't expect that our identities were exposed too early, and we were hunted down by the top powers of this universe. Song Feng, Faidu, and the other fellow Taoists were killed one after another. The palace master escaped with his men. I was supposed to die, but managed to survive and entered the God-refining sect by accident." Jian Wushuang did not interrupt Elder Pan Shan as he spoke slowly. Instead, he listened quietly. He knew that Pan Shan had been silent for tens of thousands of chaos cycles, and that he had been holding these words back for tens of thousands of chaos cycles. He needed someone to listen to. Although his words were plain, Jian Wushuang could feel the tragedy, danger, and magnificence of the past. A moment later, when Elder Pan Shan finished, he rubbed his eyes and said, "Wushuang, in the past tens of thousands of years, I have never been able to contact my hometown. It's not good for me to leave so rashly because I know that Lord Cosmos God will definitely send people over again to continue the path that we have yet to complete and the things that we have yet to complete. I've been waiting for tens of thousands of chaos cycles, and you've finally come. This is the information I've gathered in the God-refining sect over the past tens of thousands of chaos cycles. If you have a way, please pass it on to Lord Cosmos God. This is an extremely important matter, and you must not let anyone else know of it." This was because I suspect that there are people from this universe in our universe, and they hold high positions. After saying that, Elder Pan Shan flipped his right hand and a bamboo tube appeared in his hand. He handed it to Jian Wushuang. In the Divine Power universe, there was also a spy from the Void universe. Jian Wushuang frowned. In an instant, familiar faces flashed past Jian Wushuang's eyes. However, after thinking for a long time, Jian Wushuang still could not determine who had been sent by the Void universe. "Wushuang, I am only suspicious. As for whether or not this person really exists, I can't be certain, so there's no need for us to think too much. We just need to be careful. When the battle erupts again, this person will naturally surface," Elder Pan Shan said in a deep voice. "That's reasonable." Jian Wushuang collected his thoughts and nodded. Then, he took the bamboo tube that Pan Shan handed to him and put it into his interspatial ring carefully. This bamboo tube looked light, but it was extremely heavy. It was the blood, sweat, and tears of Pan Shan for tens of thousands of void eras. "All right, Wushuang. This old man has come this time for a most important matter." Elder Pan Shan took a deep breath, then flipped his right hand again. A hexagonal red crystal ball appeared in his palm. An extremely pure and boundless void energy spread out from it. "This is..." Jian Wushuang's eyes suddenly narrowed. "It's a treasure," Elder Pan Shan said solemnly. "For the past tens of thousands of void eras, other than gathering information in the God-refining sect, I have spent most of my time researching this item. This old man calls it the void power crystal core. It's formed from the most original power of void power. As long as you swallow this void power crystal core, the void power inside can instantly change the structure of your divine body, making you a true void warrior. After swallowing this void power crystal core, not only will you be able to derive the most iconic thing of a void warrior, which is the void star or the void scar, you will also awaken your accompanying magical ability, the void explosion. Furthermore, the most important thing is that if you want to turn it into divine power, you only need to think about it and you can turn it back into divine power. The void explosion will not disappear and will be displayed in the form of divine power. As for the effect, I have been in the God refining sect for a long time and have not used it before. But I think it should not be too weak. As soon as he finished speaking, the light in Jian Wushuang's eyes suddenly grew. This item was going to shock the heavens. It could be said that the existence of this void power crystal core would truly break through the barrier between the void universe and the divine power universe, allowing them to achieve a perfect fusion and achieve an ultimate sublimation. One of the main reasons why the void universe was stronger than the divine power universe was that the void universe had one more trump card than the divine power universe. It was the accompanying divine power of the void warriors, the void explosion. Even Jian Wushuang did not dare to underestimate the power of the void explosion. Its power was comparable to all the moves in Jian Wushuang's Tarot Sword Manual, except Four Seasons and Tarot. What kind of concept was this? Not just anyone could compare themselves with Jian Wushuang in the divine power universe. It could be said that in the same cultivation realm, if a person from the divine power universe was not a genius with battle power far beyond the same realm, he would only be crushed by a void warrior of the same realm. However, this void power crystal core could give the person with the divine power universe the ability to rival the void universe. The preciousness of this item could be seen from this point alone. Jian Wushuang looked at Elder Pan Shan again, his eyes filled with admiration. Wushuang, swallow this void power crystal core. Once you swallow it, you'll no longer have any flaws. From now on, you'll be able to connect the divine power universe and the void universe, said Elder Pan Shan. I can't. Jian Wushuang shook his head upon hearing this. This was Elder Pan Shan's blood, sweat, and tears. The blood and sweat of an invincible supreme for tens of thousands of chaos cycles. How could he possibly covet it? Don't talk nonsense. Since this old man wants you to take it, you should take it. Don't learn from that girl's pretentious act. Elder Pan Shan pushed the void power crystal core into Jian Wushuang's hand and immediately turned around to leave. This? Jian Wushuang nodded silently and put it away solemnly. When he reached the entrance of the corpse cave, Elder Pan Shan stopped and turned his head. He said softly, Wushuang, if you can really enter the land of gods, and if my old friends are still alive, remember to tell them that I'm doing very well. Don't miss me. With that, Elder Pan Shan no longer hesitated. With a step, his thin and hunchbacked figure disappeared under the thin blood-colored moonlight. Jian Wushuang looked at Elder Pan Shan's disappearing back and a complicated look flashed in his eyes. He suddenly remembered that in the history of the divine power universe, there was a record of a Taoist called Ban Shan, who once dominated the universe and suppressed the 9 heavens and 10 lands. However, for some reason, the once influential Taoist Ban Shan suddenly disappeared. This grand Elder Pan Shan was probably the Taoist Ban Shan who had mysteriously disappeared back then. After Elder Pan Shan left, Jian Wushuang sat down with his legs crossed and carefully examined the hexagonal red crystal ball. Produce the void scar and awaken the accompanying divine ability, void explosion. Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed with a thoughtful look. After a moment of contemplation, he no longer hesitated and swallowed the void power crystal core. Boom! In an instant, a sharp pain came from Jian Wushuang's divine body. Even though Jian Wushuang had the Chaos Overlord body, which was one of the top 3 divine bodies in the eternal world, it was torn apart in an instant. His entire divine body was being burned as if it had been thrown into a furnace that was hundreds of millions of degrees. Hiss! Jian Wushuang could not help but shout and his divine body exploded. The next moment, his divine body gathered again. The pain twisted his divine soul. It felt like hundreds of millions of needles were stabbing his pores. His divine body was crushed again. As it crumbled, Jian Wushuang could feel an extremely terrifying and powerful force emitting from the void power crystal core. It started to change Jian Wushuang's life structure bit by bit and push toward the void warrior. After being shattered and reassembled dozens of times, the intense pain slowly disappeared. An aura that was completely different from Jian Wushuang's before burst out from his body. Success! It's done. Jian Wushuang's face was pale, and he was panting slightly. Bean-sized beads of sweat formed on his forehead. He turned his head slightly to take a look. On his left shoulder, there were 2 long scarlet-red scars. They were like scars, spreading and twisting from his left shoulder. Jian Wushuang could feel that although his divine body and cultivation did not seem to have changed, there was something different about him. This is void power? Jian Wushuang could feel the void power in his body that was as vast as a river. He could not help but squint his eyes. In the next moment, he was not in a hurry to awaken the accompanying divine ability, Void Explosion. Instead, he reached out to touch the black seal on his neck, and a cold smile appeared on his face. It's time to get rid of you. The moon was high up in the sky. At the top of the limestone mountain, in one of the 7 corpse caves, it was Jian Wushuang's mansion. It was undergoing a shocking change that reversed the structure of life. Waves of enormous void power surged like the ocean and swept in all directions. This was a completely new power. On Jian Wushuang's left shoulder, there were 2 long scars that looked like hideous scars. They reflected an evil scarlet light, which was terrifying to look at. Jian Wushuang closed his eyes. This power was completely different from the void power that was transformed from divine power. In the past, when he had stayed in the void universe, he had been like a fish out of water. His divine body had always felt uncomfortable, and he had felt out of place. However, now, he could feel that he had completely integrated into this universe, just like in the universe of divine power. There was no discomfort at all. The floating void force in the air around him only needed to be lightly inhaled, and it would pour into his divine body like a whale sucking in water. He did not need to change its structure or transform it anymore. It's time to get rid of you. A cold glint flashed in Jian Wushuang's eyes. Immediately, the void power that was flowing in his body started to circulate crazily, and it charged toward the seal on his neck. The power of the curse that Wang Lu had left in Jian Wushuang's body was not strong after being suppressed by Cosmos God. However, it was like a needle hidden in cotton. No matter how dense and surging the divine power in Jian Wushuang's body was, there was nothing he could do about it as the 2 powers were not compatible. However, the situation was different now. Rumble! In an instant, all the void power in Jian Wushuang's body was activated, and it rushed toward the curse of Wang Lu that was hidden on his neck. Crack! In an instant, the seal was broken. The power of Wang Lu that remained in Jian Wushuang's body was overjoyed. Just as it was about to fight for control of Jian Wushuang's divine body, it saw countless forces of void power condense into a heavy hammer and hit him fiercely. What? In an instant, Jian Wushuang's eyes turned dark green, and his body was covered with black snake-shaped scales. He did not open its mouth, but his throat rolled and made a sound that was different from Jian Wushuang's. It was Wang Lu's voice. Wang Lu was already dead, but his consciousness had turned into the power of the curse. It was like a deep-rooted disease that was firmly rooted in Jian Wushuang's body. However, now, the void power in Jian Wushuang's body was like a security guard with nation-protecting divine sword in his hand. He was crazily chasing after the power left by Wang Lu. Jian Wushuang's divine body turned into a battlefield. The divine power that belonged to Jian Wushuang was in Jian Wushuang's divine body. It was a life-and-death battle with the consciousness curse left by Wang Lu. Jian Wushuang was sitting cross-legged on the stone bed with one side of his eyes closed and no expression on his face. However, if one looked carefully, one would notice that there was a small snake-like thing in his muscles and tendons. It was moving quickly in his body, as if it was running away from something. After an entire day and night, with a hysterical roar, Jian Wushuang opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of black blood. There seemed to be something twisting and struggling in the black blood. It's done. Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes and a hint of joy flashed in his eyes. He flicked his finger and a beam of sword chi shot out, turning the stinky black blood into green smoke and disappearing in the air. Wang Lu's curse was like a thorn in the flesh. It would come out from time to time and hurt, especially when Jian Wushuang was weak after he completely burst out his power. Wang Lu would take advantage of the weakness and fight with him for control of his body. Finally, the thorn was pulled out of Jian Wushuang's body. Next, it's time to awaken the accompanying magical power of the Void Warrior, Void Explosion. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered and he once again entered the deepest level of seclusion and attack. 3 months later, a black crow flew out of the sect master's palace and headed toward the corpse cave where Jian Wushuang was. The crow's body was stiff, and its eyes were like 2 rotten grapes, completely black. This crow was also known as the corpse crow in the God-refining sect. It was extremely fast and could travel through the void. It was the best tool for transmitting messages. Ga. The corpse crow stopped on a branch that extended out of the cliff outside the corpse cave, opening its mouth and letting out an unpleasant and eerie cry. Hearing the cry, Jian Wushuang, who was in the corpse cave, slowly opened his eyes. An extremely sharp light flashed across Jian Wushuang's eyes. Is the mission about to begin? Jian Wushuang muttered to himself and let out a breath of turbid air. He waved his hand and removed the magic barrier at the entrance of the corpse cave. Gaga. In an instant, the corpse crow flapped its wings and flew into the corpse cave. The next moment, the corpse crow spoke in the human language. Wushuang, Wushuang. The sect master has invited you. I know. Jian Wushuang nodded and then stood up. The corpse crow flapped its wings again and landed on Jian Wushuang's shoulder. Bang! Bang! Jian Wushuang's right foot stomped heavily and his whole body shot up like a cannonball. He carried the corpse crow and turned into a ray of light. Suddenly, he was like a shooting star, flying across the blood-red sky of the God-refining sect and landing in the sect master's palace. After reaching the sect master's palace, the body dissipated into black mist and disappeared from the world. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and strode into the sect master's hall. In the sect master's main hall, the God-refining sect master, Void Master Ba Huang, sat at the head of the table. On either side of him were the 5 grand elders, including Pan Shan, Mi Feng, and Lan Yue. In addition, there were 2 other disciples who had arrived before Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang knew both of them. One of them was Fu Chun, who had made a name for himself in the sect disciples competition, and the other was Yan Dan, who was now in the limelight. Seeing Jian Wushuang enter, Fu Chen's pupils shrank slightly, and a serious look flashed across his eyes. Yan Dan, on the other hand, let out a heavy, cold snort. Jian Wushuang ignored them and looked at the God-refining sect master. He cupped his hands and said in a deep voice, "Disciple Wushuang greets sect master." Yes. The God-refining sect master sized up Jian Wushuang, smiled, and nodded in agreement. Even though he did not know what had happened to Jian Wushuang, he could tell that Jian Wushuang's aura had become much more powerful than before. This made his heart skip a beat. Before long, the plan on the battlefield would be completed. He would then leave the God-refining sect and join the attacking army. At that time, he would have to choose one of his many disciples to inherit the throne and become the sect master. In the beginning, he only had one successor, and that was Yan Dan. However, Jian Wushuang's appearance made him waver. Yan Dan. This person was the only person that the God-refining sect master had already decided on to take over the throne. However, with Jian Wushuang's appearance and the dispute between Yan Dan and Jian Wushuang at the sect master's banquet that day, the God-refining sect master gradually became disappointed in Yan Dan. Sensitive, easily angered, headstrong, narrow-minded, ambitious, and not shrewd. This was the Yan Dan that the God-refining sect master had seen at the banquet the other day. How could such a person control a holy land and lead it to glory? That day, he did not point out these things. For one, no matter what, Yan Dan was still his head disciple. He could not scold him in front of the whole sect. For two, if he told Yan Dan all his feelings, it would be hard to avoid imbalance in his heart and resentment. The God-refining sect master naturally did not care about resentment, but there was no need for it. On the contrary, Jian Wushuang's performance that day had made him somewhat amazed. He was neither haughty nor humble, and his expression was calm. When the God-refining sect master looked at Jian Wushuang that day, he could not help but say something from the bottom of his heart. A heart with thousands of thunderbolts and a face as calm as a lake could become a general. Exceptional talent represented the upper limit of Jian Wushuang's growth. His outstanding wisdom meant that Jian Wushuang would never bring the God-refining sect into a land of eternal doom. All of a sudden, Void Master Ba Huang's heart started to waver when he thought about the position of the next sect master. The hall was silent. Since the God-refining sect master did not say anything, the others naturally did not dare to make any noise. After a long while, the God-refining sect master finally opened his mouth and said, "I'm sure you know why this sect master has gathered you here today, right?" Before anyone could say anything, Yen Dan stepped forward and said, "Lord Sect Master, I'm guessing that the mission is about to begin." "That's right." The God-refining sect master nodded his head. He then looked at the crowd and said in a deep voice, "I've just received news that the other sects and forces have already sent their disciples to the land of gods. You should also not delay and set off for the land of gods immediately." "Yes." Jian Wushuang, Fu Chun, and Yen Dan lowered their heads and said. At this moment, they knew that the three of them were the candidates to go to the land of gods. "Wushuang, oh Wushuang, let's see if you'll die after we leave the God-refining sect." Yen Dan lowered his head and looked at Jian Wushuang, sneering. A vicious plan began to form in his mind. Jian Wushuang was expressionless, but he had his own thoughts. It would be fine if Yen Dan acted obediently along the way, but if he wanted to be stupid and court death, Jian Wushuang did not mind sending him on his way. "All right, you three can set off. Remember, don't force anything, and be careful of people from other sections," the sect master said in a deep voice. Then, he waved his sleeve and a giant bird that looked like a bone dragon flew out from the back mountain of the God-refining sect. This giant bird had no hair, no flesh, only white bones. Its eyes were completely black. On his back, there was a high platform for people to step on. Jian Wushuang and the other two took a step forward and immediately flew up, landing on the high platform on the back of the giant bird. Screech! The giant bird stretched out its head and let out a long screech. It immediately carried Jian Wushuang and the others and shuttled through 108,000 miles. They left the God-refining sect and shot toward the land of gods. The God-refining sect master took a deep look at the place where Jian Wushuang and the other two had disappeared. He shook his head and only looked away after a long while. In the main hall, Elder Banshan also looked at the three people who had disappeared and was lost in thought for a long time. God-refining sect, Elder Hall. At the residence of Elder Shin Lian. Thud, 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 thud. A series of hurried footsteps could be heard. A trusted disciple of Elder Shin Lian walked in hurriedly. "Master, young Master Yen Dan, Wushuang, and Fu Chun have already left the God-refining sect on the giant bone bird." The trusted disciple knelt on the ground and said in a low voice, "Oh, they left just like that." In the center of the hall, Elder Shin Lian, who was sitting cross-legged, opened his eyes. A sharp glint flashed in his eyes. All right, I'll leave now. If the sect master asks where I've gone, just say that I've come to a sudden realization and left the sect to look for a breakthrough opportunity. Do you understand?" "I understand," the trusted disciple quickly replied. Nodding his head in satisfaction, Elder Shin Lian stood up. He took a step and disappeared from the Elder Hall. "Wushuang, Wushuang. The land of gods will be where your bones are buried." In the void, Elder Shin Lian's cold voice was heard. At the same time, not far away from the God-refining sect, there was a group of bright stars. This place was close to the void forbidden land and was sparsely populated. Very few people would pay attention to this place. However, such a place was where the Crimson Whale Gang, the largest gang of space pirates in the surrounding billions of miles, was located. This group of space pirates was notorious for robbing Void warriors who passed by in space all year round. The entire Void universe gritted its teeth at them, but there was nothing they could do. The reason for this was that the chief of Crimson Whale Gang was a 4-star Void Master. Under the leadership of this 4-star Void Master, the entire Crimson Whale Gang had become extremely rampant. Even Scar-level Void warriors would have a headache when they saw him and could only obediently pay in treasures to bribe him to avoid trouble. Crimson Whale Gang's headquarters was located in the middle of the stars, like the belly of a giant whale. At this moment, the chief of Crimson Whale Gang, who struck fear in the hearts of others at the mere mention of his name, was kneeling obediently at the feet of a silver-haired youth with icy eyes. Lord Bing Yi, I've received news that the Land of Gods has opened. All the major forces and sects in the Void universe have sent their elite disciples to the Land of Gods to break through the restrictions and find the alien races. The chief's entire body trembled as he spoke, not even daring to take a deep breath. It could be seen that the chief was extremely afraid of this silver-haired youth. The silver-haired youth with icy eyes nodded expressionlessly and asked, Luo Ming, I asked you to send someone to inquire about Jian Wushuang in the God-refining sect. Do you have any news? Lord Bing Yi, I've sent someone to ask around. There's no one named Jian Wushuang in the God-refining sect. Instead, there's someone named Wushuang who passed the selection and entered the God-refining sect. He has a rare talent in the God-refining sect. Wushuang. The silver-haired youth squinted his eyes and sneered. Jian Wushuang? Jian Wushuang, you're really lucky. You didn't die that day. Instead, you managed to enter the God-refining sect and become a super talent, a heaven's favorite disciple. Shaking his head, the silver-haired youth continued to ask, Let me ask you, how is Wushuang's current situation? Wushuang, huh? My lord, according to my spy, Wushuang has already left the God-refining sect and is following 2 other disciples to the Land of Gods. He also went to the Land of Gods? The silver-haired youth's brows twitched, and then he laughed. Good. Jian Wushuang, I'll wait for you in the Land of Gods. With that, he lowered his head and instructed the original Crimson Whale Gang's chief. Luo Ming, get ready. We're going to the Land of Gods. Yes. The chief head respectfully retreated. After the chief left, the silver-haired youth raised his head and looked into the distance. A cold light flashed through his eyes. This person was none other than Supreme Bing Yi, who had entered the Void universe with Jian Wushuang. At the same time, even further away from the God-refining sect, in the core of a star, an old man with a refined temperament, a clear face, and a cautious expression slowly exhaled. It's been so long. The people from the God-refining sect who were chasing after me should have left by now. The old man narrowed his eyes as he pondered. He was none other than Supreme Gongyang, who had escaped from the God-refining sect's disciple selection. On the day of the sect's disciple selection, when he saw that his identity had been exposed, he was the first to escape. He was lucky to escape from the hands of a few Scar-level Void warriors. After that, he went into the core of the earth and sealed his aura. He had been in seclusion until now. Whoosh! 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 Beams of light streaked across the star. Soon after, Supreme Gongyang heard a series of discussions coming from the mouths of the passing figures. Have you heard that the restrictions on the Land of Gods have loosened again? All the sects have sent their elites to the Land of Gods to investigate. I heard that there's a big secret hidden in the Land of Gods. Shush, silence. I vaguely heard that people who are not from our universe are suppressed in the Land of Gods. What? Not from our universe? Could there be another universe? Lower your voice. I've only heard about this matter from our sect's old ancestor. It's a great secret, so you must not tell anyone. Discussions broke out one after another, and Supreme Gongyang, who was hiding in the depths of the earth, could not help but raise his eyebrows. The Land of Gods? It's suppressing people who aren't from this universe. Supreme Gongyang's eyes flickered madly. He could faintly feel that he had grasped onto a great secret. It seems that I have to make a trip to the Land of Gods. I wonder how Jian Wushuang and the others are doing after all these years. Did they manage to escape that day? As his thoughts flickered, Supreme Gongyang flew high up into the sky. When a single person was left behind, his right hand suddenly broke out of the ground, transforming into a giant hand. Boom! The 7-star Void Warrior with an elephant's nose and ears was alone. He looked at the huge hand shadow that suddenly broke out of the ground and covered the sky. Before he could use his void technique to resist, he was grabbed by the palm of the hand. Immediately, Supreme Gongyang, who was in the depths of the earth's core, soared into the sky and casually opened up a divine kingdom, throwing the Void Warrior into it. A moment later, Supreme Gongyang walked out of the void with a satisfied expression. He had already obtained the information he wanted. Land of gods, I'm coming. Bang! In the next moment, he stomped his right foot heavily and shot out, rushing in the direction of the land of gods. Inside the void universe, as the restrictions of the land of gods loosened, many top forces sent their geniuses to the land of gods to investigate. Therefore, the universe suddenly became very lively. In the vast starry sky, a huge bone bird with a wingspan of 10,000 feet was flying at high speed. Its speed was extremely fast, and it could travel hundreds of thousands of miles with a single leap. Its wings cut through the void, creating a huge sonic boom. Jian Wushuang stood on the high platform on the bone back with his hands behind his back. Because of his fast speed, the strong wind that was produced was like a knife cutting across his face. This gust of wind was extremely sharp. If it was an ordinary star-level Void Warrior, his flesh and bones would be scraped off in an instant by this gust of wind. However, the strong wind could only move Jian Wushuang's hair. It could not even leave a single scar on his body. Of the three, it was not so easy for Fu Chun to deal with the astral winds. He could only continuously circulate his void power to form a protective barrier to continuously resist this divine power. He looked at Yan Dan and Jian Wushuang, who were safe and sound on the high platform. His eyes flickered and his face was filled with fear. He was not surprised that the Yan Dan was able to resist this bone-piercing wind. After all, the Yan Dan had already broken through to the scar level. Jian Wushuang's realm was almost the same as his. So how could he resist the strong wind so easily? Fu Chun could not help but think to himself that the reason he had been able to display his brilliance in the sex disciple competition was most likely because Wushuang had not participated in the competition. Yan Dan stood behind Jian Wushuang and kept snorting. He was hesitating whether he should kill Jian Wushuang now. Earlier on, his father, Elder Shen Lian, had already sent him a message. Elder Shen Lian had already left the God-refining sect and was rushing toward them at full speed. It would not be long before the two of them would meet up. Elder Shen Lian had a cultivation base of 3 scars. Yan Dan was confident that with his and his father's power, killing Jian Wushuang would be as easy as flipping his hand. After thinking for a long time, forget it. I'll find an opportunity to kill him after I return from the land of gods. Yan Dan's eyes lit up and he took a deep breath. He gave up the idea of killing Jian Wushuang immediately. Jian Wushuang, who was standing in front of the high platform with his back to Yan Dan, naturally felt the fleeting killing intent from Yan Dan. Shaking his head, Jian Wushuang did not take it to heart and continued to look into the distance. Almost a year later, the lonely starry sky gradually became lively. Other than the huge bone bird that the 3 of them were stepping on, there were also other strange vehicles that were coming from all directions. For example, there was a huge golden gourd. On top of the gourd sat a group of young men in long black clothes with a vertical eye between their brows. On the top of the gourd was a flag with the words Heaven's Gate written on it. Oh, the Heaven's Gate brats are here too. Yan Dan narrowed his eyes and let out a cold snort. This group of Heaven's Gate disciples also saw Yan Dan and the other 2 who were standing on the giant bone bird. The corners of their mouths curled up into a sneer. The 3-eyed man, who was the leader, even sneered. Isn't this the person I defeated in the sect exchange competition back then? It seems like the God-refining sect really has talent left. They actually allowed such a weak guy to lead a team into the sealed land of gods. He shook his head as he spoke, his face full of contempt. It was obvious that the two families had a grudge against each other. Yan Dan's face darkened as soon as he finished speaking. Shen Kong, a real man doesn't boast about his past achievements. A temporary victory is nothing. Let's fight again this time, Yan Dan said with an unsightly expression. Ha ha ha. How difficult is that? This time, don't cry and ask your old ghostly father to come and save you. The leader of the Heaven's Gate team laughed and left. Bastard! Yan Dan's eyes flashed with a fierce look as he watched the Heaven's Gate team leave. As he turned his eyes, he saw Jian Wushuang looking at him with a faint smile. He could not help but be extremely angry and scolded. Wushuang, why are you looking at me? Let me tell you, the Heaven's Gate has always had a grudge against our God-refining sect. If anything happens to me, you won't get any benefits. Time flew by and another month passed. Along the way, Jian Wushuang, Yan Dan, and the others saw many disciples from various sects coming from all directions. These people were all high-spirited and had an average cultivation of 6-star and above. Some of them were even at the scar level. However, the highest was only at the 1-scar level. The higher one's cultivation level was, the greater the rejection from the restrictions of the land of gods. Many of them recognized Yan Dan. Some of them were friendly, while some of them looked at him coldly. It was clear that the God-refining sect was quite famous in the Void universe. A moment later, a huge star field appeared in front of everyone. They had arrived at the land of gods. Around the star field, countless battleships and flying Dharma treasures flew across the void. The genius disciples from the top sects and forces were all waiting for the moment when the restrictions of the land of gods were the weakest. Is this the land of gods? Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and looked up. It was not appropriate to call the land of gods a star field because it was made up of many restrictions. A total of 99 restrictions. Each restriction was like a millstone ring of light that sealed off all routes of entry. A total of 99 restrictions overlapped and formed a terrifying array that could kill immortals and gods. These 99 restrictions were covered in celestial light. After a slight twist, they formed a 100-foot wide void that isolated all life. These 99 restrictions sealed off all paths of entry and also cut off all paths of exit. According to Elder Mi Feng, the power of these 99 restrictive spells was so great that even a 6-scar Void Master would be severely injured if they entered and would have to retreat halfway. As for any Void Warrior below the 6-scar level, they would be instantly killed and their Tao would disappear if they took a single step into the restrictive spells. Its terrifying aspect could be seen from this. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and felt the aura of the 99 restrictions. They were extremely familiar. It was the smell of divine power. In addition, he also felt a trace of a special life source from the 99 restrictions. This made him certain that the person who had set up the 99 restrictions that had rendered the entire Void Universe helpless was the Divine Life Palace Master, who had disappeared for tens of thousands of chaos cycles and had not been heard from for tens of thousands of chaos cycles. For a moment, Jian Wushuang was filled with emotions. He began to look forward to the fact that the Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace had not died and that the two of them could meet in the land of gods. Time slowly passed. No one moved. Instead, they waited for the 99 restrictions to be at their weakest before quickly entering. Gradually, more and more disciples from the top sects entered the land of gods. Rumble! A huge whale-like ship with a white bone flag and ferocious bone spikes flew over from the distance. On this huge ship, a series of wild and savage laughter rang out. Little rascals! The Crimson Whale Gang is here. Crimson Whale Gang's orders. Everyone, get lost! Caw caw caw! This land of gods shall be occupied by Crimson Whale Gang. On the ship, countless space pirates glanced at the disciples of the various sects and laughed. On the deck of the ship, the silver-haired and icy-eyed Supreme Bing Yi stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his face filled with pride. Behind him, the original Crimson Whale Gang's chief, Luo Ming, bent his knees slightly, his hands hanging by his sides and his head lowered. He no longer had the air of a great bandit who had rampaged through the universe, but was instead as respectful as an old servant. The crowd's pupils constricted and their expressions changed slightly as they watched Crimson Whale Gang approach them with no fear. The group of galactic pirates, the Crimson Whale Gang, is here. This group of stinky fish and rotten shrimp. Why are they everywhere? Damn it! Why did this group of shit-stirrers come to the land of gods? Also, who was that person standing on the deck? Why is Crimson Whale Gang's chief standing at the back, as if he's worshipping his master? Many disciples of the Holy Lands and sects said in low voices. This group of galactic pirates, the Crimson Whale Gang, was simply too notorious in the virtual universe. Individually, they were not considered strong, but they formed groups and used underhanded methods. With the 4-star-level Chief Luo Ming leading them, they were extremely difficult to deal with. Even some scar-level Void Warriors would die in their hands if they did not behave. They had never expected the Crimson Whale Gang to appear here. Moreover, from the looks of it, the Crimson Whale Gang had already changed hands. The silver-haired youth with icy eyes standing on the deck had an unfathomable aura. He would probably be even more powerful than the original Crimson Whale Gang's chief, Luo Ming. At the thought of this, everyone could not help but look at each other, their hearts sinking. If this group of people from Crimson Whale Gang waited for them to enter the land of gods and waited at the entrance to take advantage of the situation, they would be finished. On the platform of the giant bone bird, Jian Wushuang raised his head as well and looked at the group of arrogant Crimson Whale Gang members. Standing on the deck, how could he not see the leader? Who else could this silver-haired youth be but Supreme Bingyi? Supreme Bingyi also noticed Jian Wushuang, who was standing on the back of the giant bone bird. The enmity between the two extended from the divine power universe to the void universe, and they had long since reached a point where they would not rest until one of them was dead. Now that they were facing each other, their gazes met in the air and instantly created an intense invisible spark. The corners of Supreme Bingyi's mouth gradually curved into a cold smile. His lips moved slightly and he spat out 9 words silently at Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang was expressionless. He recognized the 9 words. The land of gods. A battle to the death. Jian Wushuang's eyes could not help but flash with coldness. When he had first entered the void universe, he had wanted to temporarily put aside his personal grudges with Supreme Bingyi. After all, the divine power universe was facing an external enemy, and it was a matter of life and death. Personal grudges and old grudges could not compare to the universe being in danger. However, Bingyi had set him up during the God-refining sect's disciple selection when they entered the void universe. Bingyi wanted to kill him. He, Jian Wushuang, had never been a saint who could be manipulated by others. That's good. Let's settle the new and old grudges in the land of gods. Jian Wushuang muttered to himself, and a cold killing intent flashed in his eyes. On Crimson Whale Gang's ship. Lord Bingyi, that brat from the God-refining sect, is Wushuang. Does he have a grudge against you, Lord? Do you need me to kill him on the spot? Luo Ming, the Crimson Whale Gang's chief, who was standing behind Supreme Bingyi like an old servant, noticed the exchange of gazes between Supreme Bingyi and Jian Wushuang. He immediately said in a cold voice, "You want to kill him?" Supreme Bingyi looked down at Luo Ming and shook his head in disdain. Immediately, his eyes gushed with bone-piercing resentment. "I must kill this person. I want to skin him alive and pull out his tendons so that he can experience the greatest pain and torture in this world." Luo Ming, who had his head lowered, heard this, and his heart trembled. What kind of enmity was there between the two of them? Let's go into the land of gods. I can't avoid my battle with this man today. Let's fight in the land of gods. After a short while, Supreme Bingyi took a deep breath and his expression gradually returned to normal.